Morning and welcome to Friday, March 10th, Land Use Committee meeting. We have a lot to get through today. There is quite a bit. First, we're going to handle the report that we need to submit to the City Council. I'm going to go over that and have comments from the committee members. Then if there's people of the public that want to speak specifically to that portion of our meeting, I'll let them speak so they can leave if they want. And then we're going to start the second half of our meeting, which will be going over all of the housing trends, reviewing all the staff report. Nick's got a presentation for us and looking for all of starting the incentive work. So with that, we will get going. I'm sure most of you had a chance to look over the report that mostly I put together. There's 195 city-owned properties that I was able to pull together and find and review. And then I went through each of them just with the lens of, is it wetlands or wetland buffer, and how big is it, and does it have outside a wetland buffer access from a street? So that was the first cut through the 195 properties, and then I had highlighted in green the ones that I thought, for one reason or another, might be possibly buildable. I then asked staff to go through and give me feedback on those specific properties, which is then when we restart the sort of larger, thicker lined ones. And then staff adds in, some of those were conservation restrictions based off of either the funds of how they bought the property, or it has too much, a well radius, it takes up too much of it. There's major utility easements or whatnot through it. So they went through and also narrowed it down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 properties. That becomes the final proposed 7 properties that then I added in some maps and stuff for people to be able to see what we were looking at. So that's the overview of the project. And I'm just wondering if committee members have any specific questions or other properties that maybe I missed or looked at and discounted, or any input whatsoever.
I feel like that list was very big.
It was a big list.
Yeah. And the notes from staff, I think, really show the limited amount. So I think that's kind of my only notes.
No, I'll just add thank you for putting all that together. I think this is a very comprehensive list of all the city properties that are owned by the city and all the potential properties we have.
Right, because I think one of the things we have to do then from here is make a recommendation to the city council. It will be up to the city council to then say, they'll get the whole report just like you guys are looking at, and whether or not the properties that we are proposing to be then further looked at. So what we mean by further looked at is they'll have to possibly have staff or consultants go boots on the ground and go actually look and see where those wetland buffers exist, how much actual buildable land, what else might be existing on the property, whether or not something's changed. So at this point, this has just been a look, basically on internet and basically on records that the city has about these properties. Any other ideas or comments?
The wetlands in the city GIS, I assume that's a broad cut wetlands. It's not a gradation of prime wetlands to less functioning wetlands?
That's right. Well, so I guess to be more detailed, the citywide wetland map is broad brush. It's not done on the ground delineation, but the prime wetlands were delineated, every one was field reviewed, not necessarily a formal delineation, so they're a little more accurate than the citywide wetland. And then the other note is we just got a grant to update that citywide wetland map, so it'll be improved over, it's been more than 10 years since we've updated it. So that's coming probably be done in the next year.
Are there any of these wetlands or sites with wetlands near them which have buffers pertinent to the wetlands that there might be more buildable land that we think is available based on a more definitive wetlands mapping?
I think that's something we need to look at.
And some of the larger lots that I put, there is a buildable section, but there's just no accessibility without going through a wetland, right? There's no buildable area that's near a road, right? It's like all wetlands and the buildable area is out in the middle of it. So that happened in a couple of the larger lots. So unless we want to build a giant bridge that goes over the wetlands to get to the buildable area. So those are things sort of long-term we could go out and take a longer look at, but I think in the short term, they would need a lot more studying before we could make a determination.
And, when you mentioned well radii, were any of those sites anywhere near city water, that the wells could possibly be replaced with city water supply?
I believe they're city wells.
City wells, okay.
When I'm talking about well, yeah, I'm talking about city wells.
Public water supplies,
Yes.
all right.
Exactly. Any other input or questions? Other committee members?
Just a question, are we taking into consideration zoning?
No, as a little bit. There was one lot that the staff mentioned, it's mostly industrial zoning.
Yeah.
So that was mentioned, some of the staff. We have not, technically, they're all municipal lots, so they're not
Right.
dictated by zoning. So therefore, we did not do any zoning deep study at this point, no.
Right. But I was just thinking of the land on Banfield that wasn't allowed to be residential because it's industrial zoned.
Right,
So,
that's one of the comments in there, yeah.
yeah, so if we turn another industrial parcel into residential, how does that look?
Right, and that's part of what I think the city council is going to have to make those decisions
Yeah.
when it looks at it and take a deeper dive into, what direction they want to go as far as
Okay.
what it is currently zoned or what the zoning is around it is really what they have to look
Right.
at. Yeah.
Actually, the zoning exemption is for governmental purposes, so if the city wanted to enter into a public-private venture, that would not be exempt from zoning, even if the city owned the
Correct.
property.
Correct.
So it is an issue, potentially.
Right. But I think that then the city council needs to make that determination, what they want to do.
Were you referencing, what are you referencing? Is it a place in the ordinance?
It's a statute,
It's a state statute.
yeah.
Good morning, Corey. We're so glad you could make it. We decided to, just to catch you up, I was talking about the report on the city-owned properties that we're going to, we looked at 195, we narrowed that down by wetlands and buffers and what might be buildable areas, and then staff took that list and cut it down to what is the final proposed list to recommend to city council, and we were just going to let the committee members have input, and then once we're done any input, we're going to let the public speak if this is the specific part they want to speak to, and then move on to our second part, where Nick has a presentation for us.
All right.
On the agenda.
Great, thank
So, in case you have any comments about the report that was put together, now is your chance. Anyone else have any input on this or comments? If not, I will, if members of the public want to speak to this, because there is a lot of you and we have a really full agenda, I'm going to limit this to like 2 minutes per person, and you can have to come up and sit in one of these chairs and talk into a microphone so that it can be part of the Zoom. Are there people on Zoom that will need to be looked at? Would you just check that out? Thanks.
Good
Just state
morning.
your name and address for the record, please.
Good morning, Peter Huda, 280 South Street. So, on the top of this report, it says 195 city-owned properties reviewed for potential workforce housing development. So my question, I guess you prepared this, Councilor Moreau. You consider schools available for workforce housing?
No, that's why they were discounted and not put, the ones that are highlighted in green were the only ones that were then moved into a second phase.
So my question is, it's very misleading to everybody that you have 195 properties on here. You included schools and cemeteries and Prescott Park and everything else that would be available. You
Yeah.
also included all the wetlands on here. And my question is, for the lay person looking at this, I guess my question would be, why didn't you sort this so we can look at this and just say, this is what was available? Because all of the properties on here are not available. There is not 195, and it's only this. So when I read this, it was a little concerning to me that this was really put here to mislead people because of the amount. And when I read the comments, for you to put a piece of property on here that is .01 or 1 is a little disturbing. That's all I have to say.
So
But, yeah.
I was-
I'll just say that it says These are the city-owned properties that were reviewed. We're just trying to be as transparent as possible. You know, these are everything that was reviewed. This is all the work that's been done. We're showing you all the work that's been done.
Yeah, we were asked to look at every
Pretty
city-owned
transparent.
property, and so that is why we listed all of them. It was intended to just give you all of the feedback of everything that was reviewed to whether or not it would be possible. And we discounted everything that isn't highlighted in the small list and then narrowed it down to this list, which is just the 2 pages. And then narrowed it down to this list.
It also could have been grouped more effectively so everybody could understand what the problems are in the other areas.
Yeah, you can't speak
Thank
now,
you.
you're not the microphone.
Well, this was public comment, and you weren't supposed to answer me either, so.
Anyone else would like to come and speak?
Talk to everybody here. Ruben Izagiri, Colonial Drive. So, as a representative of the hundreds of people who have signed the petition for the reconsideration of the use of the Sherburne School property for workforce housing, formally request a study be done which includes input from the community and gives us the due diligence we deserve to analyze all possible uses for the Sherburne School land, not just workforce housing, which you seem dead set on. Can the committee please promise us today that you will conduct this study? It seems like our repeated requests of this study has fallen upon deaf ears. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I just have a question. Excuse me, Manuel Garganta, 471 Colonial Drive. What's a buffer?
There's 100-foot, the city has a 100-foot buffer outside wetlands that is limited to be able to build in. It's 100 feet beyond
Why
them.
do they always?
You can't speak unless you come and speak into the microphone so that everyone can hear. And state your name and address.
Roy Helsel, 777 Middle Road, Unit 22. Then why do they make the variances always to let people, the developers, go into the wetlands?
Anyone else?
Good morning. Paige Trace, 27 Hancock Street. My question to you is, as a committee, all of you, you've presented hours of work. You've parsed it down into 7 or 8 parcels, yet, and this is to go to the city council, yet you are sitting here with all these people here, and you have not verbally stated your suggestion as to 1, 2, 3, or 4. You will be giving, I am sure, a recommendation to the city council from the land use committee, but you do not give it publicly here this morning. And I feel that that's a disservice to the residents, to the people that are invested in their own property, that are scared to death of what's coming. And I think you owe it to these people this morning to provide the recommendation that will go to the city council here now this morning before you present it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good morning, Liza Hewitt, 726 Middle Road. I guess I'm a little confused about the process of this meeting. I have some things to say, but I'm not sure that they belong here, and I don't know that the others sitting here know when they're supposed to speak. Typically at this meeting, there is one public comment and one public comment only. It comes at the end after you've discussed everything. If I would like to speak specifics on these properties, do I speak now or do I speak later? And what is the public comment at the end going to be on? Because this is out of your process, so I'm not understanding.
Yep, I split this up specifically as I announced because it was sort of 2 different things, completely different things we're talking about. First, it's the recommendation to the city council regarding the requests that they made of us. Second, we have audit reports and reviewing incentives and trends, the report that the staff put together regarding the incentives on the zoning. So because that's a completely separate topic, I decided there were so many people here that wanted to talk about this. I didn't want them to have to wait through all of that to speak about this. So
Okay.
that's why I decided
So-
to add in another public comment.
So anyone wishing to speak to the properties that you've put forth, or the Sherburne School, or anything else, should speak right now?
Correct.
Okay, then I'll speak right now. Thank you. 2015 master plan states that less than 1% of all the Portsmouth land, both public and private, that is buildable has not been built on yet, due to wetlands or, that has not been built. The rest is all wet or has problems. That's about 100 acres of public and private. There's nothing left. There's nothing left. And I guess my question is, nobody's going to tell you that affordable housing isn't necessary. We need it. We need it in Portsmouth. And I think that everybody in this room would agree, and I think that they've stated that. However, I heard at the discussion on the CIP that we need a new police station. I heard at the city council meeting on Monday that we need an ice rink, that we need more fields. So my question is, you've got 6 parcels or whatever you have, and you've got a list of needs. And now we're kind of jumping this ahead and saying, let's give land to PHA to build affordable housing. But what happens when there is no more land? And the city, all of the city residents still need services and things like that that are going to need to be used for these properties. It feels to me like you're kind of putting the cart before the horse here. You're jumping onto something that looks good politically. You've all made promises. You on the city council have made a promise that you're going to find affordable housing in Portsmouth. And I'm concerned that you're not looking at this long range, and that you're not thinking it through, and that you're not using a process by which to think this through. Finite amount of property, very, very little. And where that's located is going to dictate where you can put fields and where you can put an ice rink. I question, everybody's jumped on community campus. At what point are you going to talk to the residents about what is usable at community campus? You bought a property for $10 million, and the majority of that property, my understanding is wet. And so you have a building on community campus, you have a parking lot that you need for the building on community campus, and you have no other land, my understanding is, on community campus to build. So while these folks sat in a meeting and talked about, can't you put affordable housing, nobody from the city council or from the city came forth and said, we can't build it out there because there is nothing that's not wet. The ice rink on Monday night, they all stood up and said, we can put this at community campus. Nobody said, no, you can't. You need to be honest with people, because they're making assumptions based on what you're not saying. And I think that that's not fair. We bought a piece of property for $10 million that essentially is built out, just like everything else. I'd like to know who requested this, and I've asked, but I haven't really gotten a good, well, I've gotten an answer. I've heard the city council say they asked Mr. Welch and PHA to come forth and build housing. I heard from Mr. Welch that the city council approached him about building housing. And I think that it's important to have that discussion, because that's going to dictate sort of how you approach this too. If the city council asked Mr. Welch to build, then yes, you should be providing land. If Mr. Welch asked you, if Mr. Welch came to you and said, I want to build, then maybe it becomes Mr. Welch's problem to kind of find that land. And on that point, I'd like to know why, why your properties aren't being looked at. So you have a slew, you probably at this point, as I drive around town, have more property than we have available land. So, they're all one-story buildings. Why can't those be repurposed? Because that was stated in 2015 as well, master plan. Maybe it's time to start looking at repurposing some of these properties. So how might PHA go about, leveling something and building something and moving people and then moving them back to make that land more functional than it appears to be right now, rather than taking this little bit of land that we have left. My last thing is I'd like to know, and maybe it's on the website and I haven't found it, where is the answer to the list of those questions from that Sherburne meeting? There was a long list generated, and I think the residents were told that there'd be answers to all of those questions, because I think that those are important to have and important to use to drive your discussion about these properties. You're going to run into these same questions no matter where you look. If you look over in Atlantic Heights, the people that are living in Atlantic Heights are going to be asking the same questions that the people at in Panaway Manor were asking. So if you're going to enter into this and look at these properties, where is the list of those questions and the answers to those questions, and why can't you use those questions as a starting point to drive a conversation around what properties might be appropriate? Thank you. I'm sorry about taking so long.
Anyone else like to come and speak specifically about these properties?
Good morning. Rick Beckstead, 1395 Islington Street. I'm just going to piggyback off of what a couple of speakers have gone and said. We get one shot at this. One. I've been at this a really long time. Almost 10 years of my life have I dedicated to the city itself, whether being an aware resident or elected city official. And I'll give you an example. We get one chance at this. A property like this, to be able to utilize something. If we had to be a chance to be able to go back in time, and I'm talking like 4 or 5 years, we probably wouldn't have done the senior center where it is on Court Street, because we're in such desperate need for a police station. And I talked to 2 chiefs that we had gone and had, which would be more valuable or more usable to have a police station there, to be able to have access to the bypass, to be able to have access to downtown. But we did it. And another thing that would have gone with the senior center, we purchased community campus a few years later. Now, Kittery's model is an excellent model. Todd, who actually runs our rec department, actually was the assistant that was out there. And it was a great model, a model that we could have taken advantage of. We could have had our senior center out there with the youth, just like Kittery does, and utilized that. I'm asking this committee, and I will ask the council, to take a step back. This is being done far too early, and it's rushed. You know, I looked at some of the, being an elected official, I know one of the topics we talked about was community campus. You know, whether I'm disclosing something that I'm not supposed to say or not, but that's what we talked about. And I'll talk about 2 things. There are 9 acres out back of community campus that are not probably inhabitable and livable because there are concerns. But just like the PDA that we have out there as far as not being livable but being usable, that 9 acres could be utilized for the youth rec that was presented to you guys as far as with the ice rink and stuff like that. And 4 acres sits on front of community campus, which was buildable. We're upgrading the pickleball courts apparently now, but that was 4 acres that the council discussed about utilizing that. We didn't want to put the cart before the horse. We wanted to purchase the property first, and then we would have those discussions publicly, which has not happened yet. Greenleaf, the Greenleaf property, the old skateboard park. Here's your chance to do a batting order that's right. We are getting ready to break ground on a skateboard park. That property has a deed restriction. So did our middle school. So did the softball field, which is now an alumni. Again, history is everything. And if that's what I have to bring to you and to the community, that's what I'm going to do. I've been doing this for a very long time. We're batting out of order. I don't want to see it happen again. We need to make some right. And I'll tell you what, the number one would be the Atlantic Heights on Folksway. To be able to go and have Mr. Welch, Portsmouth Housing Authority, already own pieces of property out there, and Portsmouth does, and it's the same type of housing. The one in Greenleaf makes the same sense as well. You've got literally their properties across the street. Probably there, you wouldn't have any impacts. The chairman went and said that there were 3 criteria. Had to have a road, had to have water, had to have sewer. Those are the 3 criteria. Both Atlantic Heights one has all of those criteria. Greenleaf definitely does. And you probably could get away with, Mr. Welch, a 5-story building over there as opposed to a 4-story. Has access to the bypass to be able to go to 95 for commuters to be able to go. Let's get this right. It doesn't impact a neighborhood, and it does not eliminate a field. You guys just had the results on those field studies. We've only done one in the 40 years that I've been here in Portsmouth, 40 at community campus. It's the first one. We might get one more in, and that's going to be it. Please don't make broken promises to the youth athletics. They are few and far between. They're dwindling. They have to go elsewhere outside of our community. That softball field isn't just a softball field for the girls. Portsmouth Little League has used that from time to time when we have to, if it's open. And you've got adults that are actually using it as well. We're never going to be able to go and get those back. Make the right decision. Choose the right batting order. Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Good morning, Charlie Turner from, excuse me, 368 Greenside. I live in, off from Sherburne Road. My questions to you are, is the PHA prohibited from buying private land? And the other is, if we're willing to take away a girls' softball field, why are we not looking at the Plains ball field, the ball field on Granite Street, and speaking to what Mr. Beckstead just said, that is, if you're looking to remove one field to allow for housing, then we need to, all fields need to be on that list. The other thing is Leary Field. I mean, those right there will strike the heart of everybody in this community that's ever gone to a game or had a son or daughter play. So don't take away the girls' softball field down there. It's important to them. The other thing that I find is the study was well done, and it shows me that you have a very limited amount of city-owned property that's actually dry. The inability to build on anything is a big problem, considering we are a coastal city, and our borders are going to change over the next 20 years or maybe less. That piece of property needs to really be looked at, and I think that there's better uses for the Sherburne School site. I think there's better uses for some of these other pieces of property. For years, I have driven into Constitution Ave and wondered why nobody has ever built on that piece of property. Well, now I know why, because the city owns it. I noticed that you guys like to use it as a place to store granite curbing, and I was often wondering who was responsible for the amount of trash on that. The city's actually, it looks like a dump over there. You need to clean up your property. But my point is that I don't believe the city needs to be worrying about giving land away for housing. There is land that can be bought, and there's also other towns. We have communities that surround us that use our city. PHA can spend money buying land in Greenland, Newington, something along those lines, Rye. I think the city of Portsmouth should hold on to our land. It is our land. It's the community's land. It's not the city council's. It is all of us, the taxpayers. And my last thing is zoning is a big issue on the Sherburne site, because if we have laws that make me build a single-family home on my piece of property, but the city can build whatever they want, then I want to be able to build whatever I want on my property, and you would never allow it. Private people are held to a certain standard. I believe the city should live up to that standard as well on zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak regarding this?
Hi, Sean Muskie. I live on Sherman Avenue in Portsmouth in the Sherburne School area. I more want to talk about this board. There are three city council members on this board and Craig Welsh on this board. There are some conflicts of interest here. I don't think any board should have more than one, maybe two counselors on it. Craig Welsh, I mean, nothing against you, but you have a conflict of interest here. Your organization directly can benefit from what's determined here. This appears to the public as stacking a board. There's 4 of the 9 that have an interest in this. From what I've followed in the city politics, you've all talked about needing public housing, needing workforce housing. 4 of the 5 on this board appear to be in the pocket of doing this. It's a perception thing. There are some conflicts of interest here on this board. You may not agree with me, but that's the way it appears to a lot of people. 4 out of the 9 seem to be in the pocket already. It just doesn't seem right. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, Brandy Kramer, 584 Colonial Drive. I just wanted you guys to just take a look and see that there's a lot of different types of people that live in Panaway Manor. And they really love that it's a small community. And when you're thinking about evaluating space, you have to think about how people use the space, which is your job. I'm not, obviously. But that we like that it's a small community and that we are the affordable housing. We live in affordable housing, so we are very scared about how our taxes are going to change. Can our schools accommodate our children? There's a lot more than just seeing if there's a wetland next to it. There's a lot more ways people use it. Are you going to put in affordable housing on this side of the hospital plus affordable housing on this side of the hospital when there's such limited restrictions on getting in and out of the area on this particular area, speaking to the Sherburne school area? So I just want to make sure that you guys are aware that we're concerned. And I know you've heard that from a lot of people, but I think you just need to keep hearing it because it's not really sinking in. That being said, I know that we need affordable housing, but the whole state does. So this little space isn't going to solve the problem this year, next year, or 20 years from now. So what's the best way we can use this property? Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak specifically about?
Yeah, I have a question on Zoom. I don't know if there's.
Yep. Do you want to take Peter or
not?
you want to do?
Just wait one more turn.
1 second, Peter, please.
Sure.
Hi, my name's Eric Anderson, 38 George's Terrace. I just want to reinforce Lisa Hewitt's comments, and it's relevant to the type of turnout that you had with a meeting at Sherburne. I've never seen any that type of response at any meeting on any issue. Just to reinforce what she said, there was a series of questions that could be derived out of that. You were all given a hard copy of questions relating to this subject. And I don't know how you assemble the answers to that, but I think you have some responsibility to answer those questions in some public arena. And not that they, you were unable to answer them at that meeting, and that wasn't the purpose of that meeting, but they were presented to you in, I think, a respectable manner that you should account for them and have some type of response to the public. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? We'll take Peter on Zoom, and then someone can get ready.
Yeah, great, thanks. Just a couple quick questions. I'm sad that I wasn't able to make it there in person. I have a regular day job, so I'm glad to see so many of my neighbors are able to be there. Just curious, for the packet that seems to be reviewed there, and that was a handout, where will that be made available so that people who weren't able to make it can see the full report?
It's actually on the city website. It's on the city website.
Thank you. I will go ahead and take a look
And mine
there.
will be
Second,
later.
just want to echo some other sentiments that seem to be, or at least, or I can only speak for myself, they're bothersome to me. Number one, Mr. Welch being on the Land Use Committee, representing a private entity, his private interest, where his company has already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in the initial assessment, and I think it was hiring of some civil engineers. Was he involved, and the PHA involved, in kind of cherry picking the top pieces of land for development? Did they have a direct say, and was the city going to be extending the same free offer of land? Is the public going to be made aware that it is the city council's intention to give away the land at Sherburne to the PHA for no cost? Secondly, I also want to make sure that you guys stay true to the promises that you've made for transparency. You guys seem to say that there's a lot, that's your goal is to be as transparent as possible. I think it would be great if we could see the answers to the specific questions that were asked at the neighborhood meeting. I understand that the reporting that was there at that neighborhood meeting was actually a private documentarian from the PHA, not the city. So will the PHA be delivering that footage back to the city so that they can publish that on a website so that people can see? And moreover, I'm hopeful to learn more about the recommendations. I'm concerned as well that those recommendations aren't being shared today. Again, possibly be shared in a back room behind closed doors without the public being able to see. I think you guys have a lot of work to do on transparency. As you say, it's a goal of yours. So please be as transparent as you can throughout this entire process. I'd like to see Craig Welch and the PHA recuse themselves from any vote or any kind of proposal that might go forth, as they would be the sole beneficiary of that, really. So there's a lot of conflict of interest that I'm very concerned about. Mainly that a private entity is being allowed to really cherry pick what would be best for them to be gifted. So those are my concerns. Please be transparent. Please publish. I'll be at the city council meeting on Monday to follow up to this. I'm very concerned with the actions that have taken place so far.
Thank you.
Councilor, could I just ask Peter to give his last name and address for the record, for the minutes?
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, absolutely. Peter Officer, 627 Colonial Drive.
Thank you.
Okay, next.
I didn't know if you were going to answer something, so that's fine. I'm Megan Corsetti. I live on Colonial Drive, part of the Sherburne neighborhoods. I appreciate, this Excel document. I tried to look through it as much as I can. I guess one thing that I'm hoping that you guys will do as a committee is that you look at the properties that have been sort of finalized and look at them through the same lens that Sherburne's site was looked at. I feel like, I saw notes about concerns about zoning, and I've already heard some of those questions come up, so I really appreciate that because the zoning is municipal at the Sherburne parcel. To me, my understanding of municipal means that, it's government use, but it's community use. It's for everybody. And so if we put housing there, then that area is no longer technically for everybody. It's going to be for the residents of that new apartment complex. And then I also hope that you'll look at it and recognize that there is a girls' ball field there. I was probably one of the first of the group of girls softballs that were able to be part of that softball association and play there. I looked forward to being able to watch my own daughter play there, but she's only 6 almost, so not quite there yet. So I just hope that, if we're seeing other ball fields, that I guess we look at those, but I don't really want to see any recreational facilities be taken away from our community, because it's obvious that we just have a finite number of resources and usable land. We also don't know, we're talking and celebrating the Portsmouth 400 and how far we've come in 400 years, but what about the next 400? What are we going to be leaving my kids when they're young adults? What are we going to be leaving any future generations? If we develop every little piece of land that Portsmouth has, then we're basically saying this is all that Portsmouth needs. And we actually don't know what Portsmouth is going to need 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 or 30 or more. So I just want you to keep that in mind when we're looking at things. And then I guess just for my own knowledge and maybe the Portsmouth community, I think it's important that the neighbors of any lots that are determined as potential sources, they're notified that that's being considered, because I know that there was stuff in the paper about potential for affordable housing, but I think all of my neighbors were just sort of under the assumption it would be like everything else that happened at schools, where the school itself would be converted, the exterior would not change, you'd be looking at maybe 17 to 20 new families living there. I think that was something potentially that was digestible. We weren't going to be losing the softball field, and then we're kind of blindsided by the proposal. And I recognize that it was just an idea, and that's, the PHA's job to say, hey, this is how we think we can use this space. But I just hope that, maybe we could have some discussion, whether it ends up being the Sherburne School site or a different site. I just hope that those community members are brought to that discussion early on, and not how it has been feeling for us and my community. So that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to speak? Is there anyone else on Zoom that's raised their hand?
Raise your hand if you'd like to speak on Zoom. No hands.
All right, if that is the case and there's no one else, last chance. What I'd like the committee here to just figure out is whether or not we've done enough work based off of what we have in front of us. Our job isn't to vote on these or decide on these. Our job was, we were asked to come up with 10 potential properties that might be developable for the city. That was what we were asked to do. I've come up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, not quite 10. But do you guys see any other ones? Do you want us, or do we think the staff and this committee should do more work on these properties, or should we now submit our lists to the city council and let them figure out what the next step is? I'd just like feedback of the members feeling where we should go from here.
I think it's important to recognize that while we will submit this list to the city council was just giving the rec studies need. So while the start of this list was focused on potential housing sites, I think that we will send this to the council, and the council will recognize this, is that this is all we have. So I want to touch on the fact that we do hear everyone. We are digesting this at a pace. We heard the first request, which was slow down. We accepted that. Okay, and so we understand that there are multiple needs. And so by sending this to the council and having the council look at this, the council has to determine, as everyone has said here, what the order of needs are. Again, when this was first looked at, it was, we know we need housing, but now we know there's requests for other things, and they've been made now public through the rec study. I stand confident in my opinion that if we were to remove a field, I would not agree to that unless we were replacing a field. We understand that there are other needs besides housing, but again, we have to scale that as a community. I heard several times for people say, you guys ran on affordable housing. Absolutely. And we were elected for that as a forefront. So I know that I feel a responsibility that people elected me because I said, I'm going to do my darndest to bring some more affordable housing. So I feel like sometimes that is said as a negative. Well, you ran on housing, so of course you're pushing it. Absolutely. Absolutely. As someone who grew up in public housing, absolutely. So I want to make it very clear, though, that we also understand that there are other needs. So it is a weighing of the balance game. I propose a question to the neighborhood, and again, this is a hypothetical question. How would you feel if we put the ice rink there? And you had potentials of 500 or so teams every week in and out of that neighborhood. How would we feel if we put the sports complex there?
Would feel good.
Okay. But
Say I would feel good.
But some of the neighbors are shaking their head no. So this is what I'm saying, is that I don't want this process to be criminalized as that we are pushing just one thing. We now have honed these properties, which is what one of the biggest takebacks I took from that meeting was, please put together a list of other properties and let's go through them. And I think that this is the start of that process. Okay, I think that when this gets sent back to council, I know that the first discussion I'm going to say is, okay, now we have these other pockets of things we know we need. We have to start weighing those, and we have to weigh those. And I know it sounds hard. I live in Maple Haven. I live in a very isolated community that's identical, same developer, same time frame as Panaway. So I understand the desire to keep that secluded feeling. I also have to jump out onto Route 1 every day and also have a major development that went in on Ocean Road directly across from me. I understand uniquely the sense of not wanting to give up that space. But I also understand that we also have needs besides housing that were just touched on by everyone. And we know that we have maybe 7 lots that still need to be surveyed. We talk about community campus, which, was what, and I still praise the former council for purchasing that. But I also think that we should have done better surveys. The surveys that were done there were 15 years old. So we know that those wetland buffers that we have here and that we know, those are probably smaller. So the potential 9 buildable acres, maybe now are only 4. maybe cross over wetlands. Maybe now we're only 2. We have more due diligence to do, but now we have sites that we're honed in on to do that diligence on. So I ask everyone in the community in this room for a little bit of grace while we get our heads around what our full community needs are. And I completely agree with you. I constantly have said, when I ran the first time, when I ran this time, my mindset is, what is Portsmouth in 50 years? What is Portsmouth in 100 years? You know, we tend to see that, no offense to anyone in this room, community involvement tends to come from an older generation. And I'm always looking at, well, I'm going to be here for the next 75 years. So what does that mean? What does that mean for your grandchildren, for our children, for us who are trying to purchase homes and figure out what our needs are? When we talk about the schools, I've already said multiple times, we need to work with the school board to look at what those projections look like, because we know the projections of our community, that school age demographic, are actually going down. And so does that mean that in the future we're building up one school and maybe removing another? I don't know, but these are long haul questions that I think that start with analyzing deeper these locations. So again, I just ask for the grace, and I think there's something to touch on that. When this board was formed, it was really to look at some zoning, some possible building, things like that. And I think that was one of the things that, we asked for a representative from PHA, because we knew that there was a need on that. So we wanted to make sure when we were looking at zoning and ADU updates and things like that, that we had a full spectrum of people that could represent different areas. So that is my... Yes. No. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm still new with the rules. Email me.
Any other comments from the committee members? Do you think this is ready to move to City Council, or do you feel like there's more work that we should do?
I had made a couple notes after I got the list, and I just had a couple questions about a couple of the lots that weren't on there.
Yep.
And one is the parking lot here.
Mm-hmm. It's a parking lot, so yeah, I noted it as a parking lot. And
Right.
I was trying to look for literally land that wasn't.
Which
current.
parking lot? Where is here?
The City Hall lot.
Lower lot.
Lower lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty big lot.
We can certainly
Yeah.
add that to the list, like I'm saying. I was
it's
trying to look for things
Park
that
underneath
aren't.
it, build over it, or, it just seemed like it was available. And then the senior center, is there nothing that can be done with that in that house that's on site?
There is one small house that we own right there, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know. It seems like a fairly good-sized lot.
It's like 0.23 acres, that lot, at that house,
Well, I mean, with the senior center.
with the senior center.
So that sounds like we can add those and look at those.
And then the other one that Mr. Exted brought up was the skateboard park. Is there
Yeah.
a deed restriction on that or something?
There are deed restrictions. The part that's not developable is in the wetlands, and the building itself is leased to,
Operation Blessing.
thank you. I'm like, it's right in front. I'm trying to think of its name. Operation Blessing actually has a lease on that building.
Yeah. Okay. All right, that was all I had.
Anyone else?
I can just add something, Counselor, that the planning department can certainly look at
Pardon,
more
Peter,
depth at these
sorry.
properties. As we
Can we please keep the noise level down, folks? Thank you.
It seems to me that this probably isn't the end of this conversation. It's really looking at properties that hadn't really been looked at before, the vacant land mostly. We certainly can do more to look at these, and we can take that either from this group or from the council, but staff can go do a little more investigation. We're going to do more wetland delineations, like I said, citywide, so we'll have more information there. So I think if it's an iterative process, that would be a good way to look at it.
Thank you.
I think that would be very helpful for us. I think this is a good starting list. I think the properties mentioned, I think it wouldn't hurt to add those and just look at everything, consider all options.
So I guess I could certainly add these 2 other properties to be looked at. Do we want staff from this committee to look at this more, or do you want City Council to get a chance as a whole to look at this list? Adding these 2 properties that were just added.
I would say if we send this to staff, and maybe if staff can highlight the properties that will be relooked at when we look at the buffers in the wetlands, so that will be noted at least when presented to council with kind of what we have again as vacant, properties that haven't been addressed in the same way.
So we'll keep it for now.
Correct,
We'll-
yep.
All right, so we'll hold it for now, and at our next land use committee meeting, hopefully we might have that
Yeah, we
update.
can, a little more resolution on the buffers, the current status of them, and maybe some properties that have buildings on them that might have other opportunities we could talk about.
Okay.
We can work on that.
And we'll add the other two to the list. All right, I think that sums us
I'd
up.
like to add to that a little bit. I appreciate the work that's been done, both with that you did and then the staff's done in refining things. But I feel I'm reminded of the old expression, the hurrier we do, the behinder we get. And I feel that there's some perception of conflict issues, but there's also influence issues. And it seems to me that it would be a disservice to the council to give this list, or even a slightly revised list to the council without more analysis done. And I think we got some money from the state last year. I don't know if any of that could be used to hire one of the many very good local firms we have to work with staff to provide a sort of an independent technical analysis to bolster that work. It would be inappropriate for this board. We have 2 engineers on this land use committee who happen to be planning board members. We can't do anything because odds are it's going to come to planning board at some point. So we're knocked out. There's other issues. The counselors, you guys do good work, but you're not technical people. So I think it would be a great benefit and also help staff, because I know you guys have nothing to do when you sit around playing cards all day, but having some licensed engineers and wetlands people to help you, I think could really be a benefit here.
I certainly can talk to the city manager to see if there is some money to hire somebody to help staff evaluate these and come back to us with that.
What we usually do in the engineering world, we do strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threat analysis, and this first cut is a great first cut, but, and I understand the list was a list of all city properties, so, the fact that you've cut it down to 7 is great. But there might be, one of your comments, it occurred to me as I was walking up here this morning, the upper parking lot. Well, could that be used? What are the ramifications of taking away those parking spaces and putting a building there? I don't know. But that's the sort of thing that can be figured out. And just sending it as a political football back to council without having some technical basis, I think you guys are asking for trouble. I'm not running for anything, and I don't intend to run for anything. That's your job, not mine. But I think you should make your decisions. Get the technical issues settled first, then you can move into public policy. We're not at public policy yet. Making decisions about which of these parcels to use after you've got a good basis of upon which to make that decision or decisions is where I think you should be. So that's my thought.
There we go. Then if everyone's in agreement, I will talk to the city manager to see whether or not there's money to get an engineer to help the staff to take a deeper dive into the list.
So moved.
That was a motion.
I don't take motions or votes. I just make everyone in agreement if we have any issues. All right, so we will continue to look at this and look at it with staff and the engineers, and we will move on from there and eventually get it back to the city council.
Thank you, everyone who came.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
I didn't want
everyone.
you guys to have to stay if you didn't want to.
It'd be great if you stayed.
I'm taking my leave with everyone else.
We'll just take 2 minutes while we let folks leave that don't want to stay for the rest of our riveting meeting that we have. Thank you, Joe. I very much appreciate you staying.
Just went over
Every other elbow. I mean,
repurposing lands that use didn't build it up, had already used.
Thank you, everyone. If you guys could just go ahead and exit so that we can get going.
We're inbound. I mean, we go anywhere.
If you take your conversations out to the hallway, that would be great.
My dad, before I came here, it's just like, yeah.
Can you please talk out the hallway so we can continue our meeting?
Like, whoa, okay, let's take it back over. Yeah. Like, oh, God.
All right, Nick, I believe you are going to start us out with the review of the staff audit report of housing trends for the past 5 to 10 years.
There's a lot of stuff on that screen.
Are you sharing it? already?
I am.
You should be able to do.
How do I get rid of all that stuff?
Up in view, you should be able to do full screen up in the top left. No,
go.
Up in the, very
Up here?
top. No, over left. Yeah.
View.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then full screen mode,
screen.
almost all the way down. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's right.
If
That's
you want to
good.
get rid of
And how do I get rid of this thing?
So the little line, see the little line?
This?
At the top. No, go up to the box.
I want to get rid of all this. Sorry. Fresh out of grad school. Apparently not.
Actually, we can hide it better than that. You just do the little line at the top.
It wasn't that easy.
So 2 weeks ago, you couldn't even spell planner.
It says press escape.
It's going to go away. It's just letting you get it back if you want.
Got it.
There you go.
Get it back. You got
All right.
That's
now,
a
Nick,
bumbling
take it
start.
away.
So, good morning, everybody. That was a spirited start to our monthly meeting, but a good one. And I think what I'm going to try and do here with Howard as well and Peter is sort of shift gears and get back to sort of what Rick was just saying, a better understanding of baseline conditions in the state of sort of housing in the city, what's been going on in the last 5 to 10 years. I think you're likely to find some of this information presented this morning is not intuitive, it's not well understood. We have difficulty even in the planning department tracking this data, and it's taken a fair bit of effort to sort of normalize multiple data sets to come up with some numbers of what's actually happening in the housing market in Portsmouth in the last particularly 8 years of data that we've collected. In full disclaimer, I think I'm reasonably comfortable this is 95 to 98% all-inclusive of the housing units that have been established in the last 8 years. There's probably many single-family, single-lot developments that might need to get added. But this should capture pretty much what's been filed, approved, under construction, under appeal, or completed in the last 8 years. And I think again, if you're like me, you'll find it illuminating as we embark on this next phase of looking at regulatory changes outside the ADU that we just finished. It's going to be a little surprising. It was, again, to me, what the numbers say and what we're looking at for the next few years in terms of housing supply and new construction. So we've broken this into 3 pieces. I'm going to do the housing trends at the front here, and then I think it'll make sense, given there's about a dozen slides, to stop, take questions before launching into the zoning incentives, which is, again, another 10 slides, talking about how our regulatory controls right now encourage, through the innovative land use statutes, workforce housing. And then the third piece to this presentation is the general framework we're working under through the Housing Navigator position, which is Howard's position in the planning department, how we're going to address, reframing or calibrating the housing needs of Portsmouth on the backs of some other studies that have been done in the past year, and the data that we've collected, sort of our audit. This is kind of an audit of where we are and where we might be going. And then I think in particular it's going to lay up the need to really look at the regulations in terms of being more effective. So hopefully I can figure out how to advance this. The arrow doesn't seem to work.
No?
No, no.
Down arrow?
No, none of the arrows work.
I click it on the screen with the mouse.
All right, there we
you
go.
go.
Thank you, Peter. So, not much changed. So the first section is the housing trends. So just at sort of 50,000 feet, I thought it was important to look at where we are now, what's the population of Portsmouth in comparison to the region, the Rockingham County. Just look at some of the basic housing data that's out there that represents at least the last 5 years coming up to 2020, so 2016 to 2020. This is pulled right out of the RKG study that I think the Housing Authority commissioned last year. Portsmouth's about 22,000 people. We're 7% of the county. In terms of households, we've got almost 10,700 households. It's 9% of the county. We're growing from a population standpoint. Again, 2016 to 2020. Don't forget that, because a lot of my data goes to 2022. and from the city itself. This is not city data other than whatever reporting went into the state to generate these numbers. And I would just say, from my perspective, a lot of the state data on housing is not particularly robust. I've seen a lot of weaknesses in the reporting of new building permits and new housing starts that can often skew what's really going on in the community. We can talk more about that maybe towards the end of the presentation. But we do have smaller household sizes than the region at 2.5 in the region and 2.1. It's not it is a significant difference. But anyway, we have a younger median age. I think there's a tendency for young professionals to move here as well as retirees, and they're going to work the other direction on the age. There's probably far more younger people moving here than the older retirees, because that number is only 41 and a half years compared to 47 in the county. Obviously, we have very high land and property values. Houses are typically nearly double the value to the incomes of the people in the community. That's the value of the house to the income of the household, to the average income in the community. We're nearly double that to the county. The median home value, I believe that's going to be all for sale units, so that includes condominiums and single-family homes. So if you're trying to buy a single-family home, I think today's paper had a little clip I looked at on the way in. To buy a single-family house in Portsmouth is considerably higher than $456,000. So this is going to take condominiums and small units and average that number out. But we've got somewhere between 35 and 50% higher average housing costs than the county. The rents, I'm not sure I'm buying this, but the rents look fairly comparable. I don't know why. Maybe Craig can respond to that later if it's of interest to anybody. In particular, it's not surprising given that Portsmouth is an urban community. We're about 50-50 on owner-occupied units to rental units, which is considerably lower than the region, but it kind of makes sense when you hop in your car and drive around Rockingham County. There's far more single-family detached structures in other communities than an urban market like Portsmouth. And we've got, interestingly, I don't know what the county number is, but subsidized housing units are presumably in this report from RKG, units that have regulatory controls on either the rental or the sale of the unit that keep them so-called subsidized or affordable. And we have almost 1,300 units, which is 12% of our total housing stock, which was bigger than I would have imagined, not knowing this data before I looked at the table. Importantly, however, I think in a market like Portsmouth, that 12% is increasingly reflecting what's affordable in the city, and most of the 88% is increasingly moving away from affordability that would be represented in the subsidized housing. The more Portsmouth sort of gentrifies and increases in value and attractiveness to outside buyers, the more that number is going to be critical in representing what we've got for affordable housing as a baseline. Single-family housing units were again 51%. Those are single-family housing units, I believe, including, sorry, that number is likely including some condominiums, but I'd have to, that came right out of the RKG study, so maybe Craig can answer that. I don't think it's that relevant. What's more interesting here is the data that we've got in the planning department, which is what's been going on in the last 8 years. And I just want to quickly jump through a few slides about, well, how many housing units? We're all recognizing there are deep housing needs in Portsmouth, in particular the workforce housing and affordable housing. But how many units have been filed in the last 8 years? What's the status of those units between pending approval, under construction, under appeal, or just waiting to start construction? And what type of housing are we building? Where are we building it? And, I'm using loosely this affordable housing notion of going beyond just workforce housing and looking at what the Portsmouth Housing Authority has done, as well as ADUs, as well as potentially micro apartments as more affordable housing options. So this is interesting, looking at the last 8 years of just permits that have been filed with the city for new housing units. And you can see there's a lot of consistency, but there are a couple of years there where there were considerably more applications filed or more housing units requested. Whether there are more applications or not is another thing, but you go from sort of an average there of 150 units a year to 400 in 2016 and 664 in 2018. So that's obviously going to take time to move through the system. Most of this housing, we presume, will be built, and it's a question of when, and it typically will take 2 to 4, sometimes even 5 years between when you file and when you get an occupancy permit, depending on, again, your situation as a builder. So there's a big lag. So I think you're going to see here, well, we've got 254 units that are in that total. That's 1,810 new housing units that have been submitted for approval in the last 8 years. That's a lot.
Can I ask?
Yes.
Can you just clarify what exactly you mean by filed?
Requested. They filed an application to create 1,810 new housing units.
Okay, so that's when it lands in the planning department.
Lands in a board. It's going to a board or commission for approval.
Okay.
So it's at the
I'm
planning
guessing a
board.
lot of those 664 didn't hit the planning board for a year or two.
What's 664?
The 2018 664. I'm just thinking back in my mind that some of those probably didn't hit the planning board until 2020-ish.
No, I would say that everything is going to hit all boards within 12 months. You'd never have anything bump 2 years forward. It's the construction and the occupancy permit that's taking the 3 to 5 years before they're actually built and occupied.
Okay.
Okay, so then they're on the market, and then they're affecting the supply, they're affecting pricing, they're affecting, addressing affordable housing needs or middle market needs, right? Not.
My guess is West End Yards was 2018.
Well, it was. It was. I mean,
Yeah, I'm just thinking back. I know some of the big ones were during the pandemic and on Zoom. And so that's why I'm just thinking back, like, yeah. I'm thinking of the Bartlett 105.
So we've got all those. So,
They're under appeal.
Nick, are these all market rate?
No. The housing authority's in there. I'll get you there.
You're getting there? Okay.
Yeah. But the non-market rate are less than 10% of what's here, by far. In fact, the Portsmouth Housing Authority project on Court Street is only 4% of the supply we're talking. So 1,810 units have come in and requested permits over this 8 years to build new housing units that don't currently exist. And none of them have demolition of housing units included in their proposal, so there's no net loss. So yes, we have these spikes, and Corey's right. In 2018, somebody like the West End Yards might start with the BOA and not make it to the planning board until 19. The bigger and the more complicated the project, the longer the permitting typically takes. But none of them typically take more than 18 months from front to back, sometimes 2 years, but that's the rarity. So most of these projects that you see, the 664, they're going to be through all the boards and commissions by the year, by 2019. For the most part, unless they filed in December.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as I think back, especially 105, that conceptual came like way ahead of time. So this makes sense. Okay, thanks, Nick.
Right, and that's a good point too. Some of them will be 2 years if they're doing preliminary conceptual design review. Go to the HDC, go to the BOA and the planning board. But again, it's not the norm to be that long. But there's a substantial lag. Well, look at the second bullet. We've got 1,137 approved housing units that have not been built, that have been through this process. That's an amazing backlog. We're averaging less than 100 units going on the market in new construction a year over the 8 years, and there's almost there's over 1,100 that are going to be coming on the market in the next 4 to 5 years as these things move forward. The next slide will sort of get into the status, maybe make it clearer. So here's, I think it's 1,810. I apologize at the top. This will be continuously massaged as I go through the data sets. But out of the 1,810, 624 have been completed over the 8 years. So, yeah, there's probably some single families out there, so that number might be 650, even 675 for total new housing units. But 624 have been captured in this analysis as completed. Well, that's only 78 units a year over 8 years of new housing construction in the city. We've got 600, the same amount essentially currently right now under construction all over the city. And most people don't realize that because they live in a particular neighborhood and don't see a lot of this development on Lafayette and the Gateway, downtown, North End. There's as much development under construction now as has been occupied in the previous 8 years. And there are 254 units that are currently under appeal in 3 projects. They've all been approved, but they're under appeal. And should they prevail in the appeal, they would proceed to construction. They don't need to come back for more permitting. There are 271 units that have been through the process and through the appeal period. They're not under appeal. So there's another nearly 300 units to go with the 600. There's 900 units. So we're building up to the 1,137 units. 63%. There's a massive backlog, which is going to really affect the supply of new housing. Whether it moves the needle on pricing is another thing. It may not, but it will be a substantial difference. And I'm surmising from the data, there's going to be a significant difference in the housing stock that's on the market for buyers with this data. And we've got this backed up backlog of approved projects.
Are you including any approved and constructed ADUs in these?
Yes. And there were only 13 ADUs that have an occupancy permit. There were 37 that got filed, and I cannot remember the delta between the two. Some of them have left and didn't finish or won't build, but the ADUs are not a significant number in this 1,800. So let's look at the type of housing these 1,800 units represent. Not surprisingly for probably most people in the room, but what do we got? 85% of them are medium to high density multifamily projects, whether it's the Housing Authority, 105 Bartlett, everything in the North End, the Gateway districts, Cinemagic, Viridian, Westerly. All of those are either medium or high density multifamily. They're typically 10 to 25 to 30, even 40 units per acre. So that's where most of the housing growth in the city is occurring. To me, that's good news if you're going to grow. And sort of back to some public comments about the scarcity of land, that is true. But Portsmouth's opportunities for growth and development are not greenfield developments like Beverly Hill Road and Banfield. It's redevelopment of existing property that's already been developed with either parking lots or buildings that are single-story and need to be replaced. Think of the Parade building in the North End as a classic example, where there was no greenfield land, undeveloped land lost in approving the Portwalk project that created several hundred housing units and the commercial on the ground floor. The same thing's going to happen on Russell. They've got 88 units of housing, a hotel, and an office building, all on a paved parking lot. It'll actually be greener when it's done than when it started. So how we grow and where we grow is, to me, and what it looks like, those 3 things are the most important aspects to charting that next 50, 100, 400 years. We need to grow smart, and I think that's not to suggest everything that's been approved here is ideal. I think there's clearly a lot of lessons learned for all of us in going through the permitting process and listening to people and looking at sites, doing the technical review. It certainly isn't perfect, but if you were to say to somebody in my world, hey, we need 1,800 more units in the next 10 years, where are you going to put them? It's going to be in a community that's urban with services that's highly walkable. It's going to be where those services and the walkability exist, and I think for the most part we're achieving a fairly good degree of success with that. So the single families here are only like 200 units, and there's like almost 60 of them. 56 of them are in Parsons Woods, next to the cemetery in the middle of nowhere. To me, that looks like 1950. I mean, that's an area where we probably need to do a better job to not be so land consumptive with getting 56 units. Just compare that to the Housing Authority with 63 on an acre and a quarter. Those guys out there are using 20, 30 acres to put those same number of people, essentially, a little bit bigger units. These are the decisions we have to make as a community. So again, 85% of the housing is medium to high density that's in this log. There are 35. I counted 35. I think it might be 37 now. I did not include to 2023, so the numbers are a little bit lower because we're only 2 months into this year. So the ADUs haven't done a whole lot, but we're hopeful with the amendments things are going to advance there. We've got more single families in the last couple of years than we've had in the 10 before that because of projects like Parsons Wood and Banfield Road, the 22 units. And we don't have many two families going in, but some low density. These low density 29 units are essentially 4 units or less in a traditional neighborhood rather than downtown. So where are we building? Thankfully, we're not building a whole lot in the rural area. And we can all take solace that, hey, 7% is good, but it's all about the quality. And back to Parsons Wood, was that the best use in 2022 for that volume of property? I would argue it wasn't, but we can have a debate about that another day. How we grow and how we use these large open spaces is really critical. Most of our development, 90% of it, is redevelopment, like I said earlier. It's not greenfield development. So most of these 1,800 units are not going into a farm field or a forest and taking everything out to build housing. That's the good news. The downtown, the West End, and the Gateway represent 90% of the receiving area for all new housing development in the city over the last 8 years. So I think again that's positive, even with all its blemishes and imperfections that we can clearly work on. We're at least targeting. We're looking in the right spots, I think, as a community as to where we're going to grow to address our housing needs. Traditional neighborhoods are the neighborhoods that typically were here at the turn of the last century. Easy way to say it. The areas, Middle Street, South Street, not downtown. West End, everybody knows what that is. The North End is in the downtown in this model, this grouping. The Gateway is the highway commercial areas that the Gateway districts sit in. So it's Route 1, some of the property on Woodbury at the end towards Newington, and like the church there on Market Street. Those are in our Gateway district, so that's where this number comes from. You can see those three represent 90%. Suburban would be the post-World War II developments, the Panaway Manors, the Colonial Drive. If there's something in there that got developed, it would fit into this bucket. Out on Sagamore as you move towards the Wentworth, if you're Chimberg going down towards the river, that would, to me, be a rural impact. But if you're up taking the Golden Egg or whatever it was and turning it into the 6 units now, that would drop in my buckets here into the suburban category. It's not perfectly clean, but I think it makes general sense to do that and understand where these things are occurring. So I called this affordability, but clearly some of this is market rate housing. The ADUs, of which we've had 35 filed and only 13 make it to occupancy, they're clearly semi-affordable. They should represent a price point, even though they're expensive to build and either sell or I guess you can't sell the rent. The rent should be more affordable than not sitting in an ADU. Micro units, we've approved 21. I think everybody knows that from the visit to the planning board for 238 Deer Street. Whether that project actually comes back for that conditional use permit remains to be seen, but I kept it on the list because I'm under the impression, speaking to them, they are going to come back. So I left it in here, and I left it in here not just because they're going to come back, hopefully, but they presented a very different housing type for the city, and I think a positive one. That this was kind of our beta test for both them and us to see if this would be financeable and would create the benefits that have been sold in approving the project without the costs of any externalities of parking concerns or what have you. So the workforce housing units, we've only achieved 47 in this 8-year period, and I believe it's 27 at West End Yards, 2 at the so-called Tex-Mex development on Lafayette, and then I believe there's 17 or 18 that are going to be put in the Cinemagic project. So only half of these have been, 2/3 have been built, something like that, in the workforce housing units, and I've got some slides to show how that process has been working in the incentives. And then you've got the Housing Authority. I just put the 64, if it's 63, 64, I can never quite remember where you landed with the total number, but I'm guessing, they're all affordable in that project. And what's important is, and what's surprising to me, as I said earlier, we got 167 units here of, again, loosely, it's hard to use these terms without defining them because everybody has a different vision of affordability, workforce housing, how deep is it. I think all of these represent affordable housing options in a city like this, any of those 4 buckets. And I was surprised to see, nearly 10% of what's been approved, what's been filed for approval in the last 8 years, would fit into this category. I thought it would have been half that myself. To me, that's what's really great about going through this exercise, is testing all your assumptions about what you think is going on in the community, and I would argue just about all of us gets it wrong somewhere big. So this is really fruitful. But I think if we didn't have the Housing Authority doing the Court Street project, this would be almost nothing. What?
Pitiful.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things on here. Where are we headed in respect to the data? This is maybe what the data says to me. It may say something different to you. We got over 1,300 new housing units in the pipeline. We got 4 or 5 years supply at the rate we're spitting out occupancy permits over the last 8 years. If we didn't approve any more projects, we'd have a 4 or 5 year constant supply of what we're doing now at 78 to 80 units a year. So there's a lot of, again, backlog of units that are going to come on the market very soon. I think we're largely growing where we should be, where the infrastructure already exists. I think redevelopment, again, this is what I take away. This may not be what you take away, but I think we're largely growing where we should be in respect to greenfield versus brownfield or redevelopment sites. The ADU amendments we all worked on for 6 months. I think they are going to increase the frequency of ADUs. It remains to be seen how significant of an increase it is, because there's still a lot of challenges economically in doing ADUs, despite what the regulations say or not about where you can do them. They're not cheap. I think there's significant remaining redevelopment opportunities in the Gateway District. Whether you're at the iHeartRadio site or any of those plazas, we have a lot of paid parking lots in the Route 1 corridor in Lafayette that are already in the gateway districts. And I think we're going to continue to see significant development in that corridor, like we're already witnessing since we passed the gateway districts in 2017. So what's the not so good news to at least Nick? I think downtown and the North and West End are going to be more challenging given the lack of opportunity. There's been a lot of development here in the last 10 years in the North End and West End. that I think there's going to be diminished opportunities to have the kind of impact that we've seen in the last 10 years there. So that's going to put more focus, I think, on the gateway districts for those same builders that do high-density residential developments, multifamilies. You know, we're going to continue to see, I think, a lack of smaller micro-housing. I mean, we haven't even got this one project built, but I think there's a need for that, especially for the service and hospitality workers in Portsmouth. I think, you know, the group housing, dormitory style, same thing. You know, there's micro housing and then there's sort of group quarters. We don't have a allowance in, I don't think so, in the zoning to do any significant group quarters housing to support the hospitality workers or service workers, and it's something we should probably look at. Other communities have done that. College towns regularly have that. I think, you know, we're going to have a lack of very low and low-income housing, and that really speaks to what the Housing Authority does in diving that deep in terms of affordability. That's extremely difficult to do given the cost implications of providing the housing. And I think we're going to continue with the direction we're going to have trouble providing lower, mid-range, middle housing. The stuff that's, you know, the workforce housing numbers right now for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit for sale are over $400,000. It's kind of obscene how expensive even the workforce housing deed-restricted units are, at least for someone like me, that, you know, when you get even in the 5s and 6s for new construction, it's extremely difficult to find that in Portsmouth, and I think it's going to continue to be a market failure that we're going to have to work hard to encourage that to happen, because it's not going to happen on its own, which is why we have, like everyone else, an affordability problem. Near and dear to me, and you're not surprised to hear it, but I put this bullet on here late last night. I think we're only going to be successful, or we will be more successful in providing new housing opportunities if we're more sensitive to how the new projects fit into their surrounding context. And it doesn't mean they need to look the same, but they need to be extremely sensitive and respectful to the character of the place in which they're proposed, and the design of the building, and the design of the site. And to my eyes, looking at a lot of the housing in the 1,810 units, much of the housing outside the historic district is severely lacking to me in fitting in and being having its own identity that fits into the overall character of what Portsmouth is, who's here, and how we feel about the community. So we've got to find ways, I think, to address that, because I think that's a market failure. If we don't have design review for new projects outside the historic district, we're likely to continue to have added conflict between neighbors and abutters, the applicant and the board members sitting in the middle trying to figure out how to get to yes. It'd be nicer to start at a better place than you know, a D- sometimes on the design. And there are regulatory ways to get there, pathways. And obviously, it goes without saying, we've got high costs of construction that, yeah, they're starting to go down, but they're still obscenely high, what it costs to create a dwelling unit. We've got high land values. We've got now rising interest rates that are definitely chilling the market. And we've got all that is reducing the supply of new housing and making our incentives even less attractive. So we can't control some of this stuff, but we have to recognize those external market conditions are having a profound effect on our ability to address workforce or affordable housing, certainly outside the downtown. It doesn't increasingly work in downtown Portsmouth. So I'll stop there before I just put these slides up on the incentives, which are already in the zoning ordinance that address the gateway and the downtown zoning districts.
My immediate thought in seeing all of that data, and I don't know about anyone else, but we need to focus on the gateway districts and making those more attractive, it seems like.
Yeah.
Maybe making places that are underutilized better utilized. I mean, I've always said, wouldn't it be nice if someone owned a strip mall out in a gateway district would combine that with housing or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think that might be one of the focuses that we need to look at.
I remember meeting with former councilor Perkins Quaka, and she was saying, one of their goals was upping the gateway districts and allowing more housing there. That any shopping center or something potentially they could go up. Then it could become an actual neighborhood where you live, work, play. In those over by where FedEx is, and then over by where like Demula's Market Basket. But again, that's private property, right? So that's not something the city has control over.
We don't, but we have control over incentivizing,
Exactly.
which is what this conversation. We
It's
need
called
to start-
sprawl repair, and that's one of the things that land use regulations can promote.
Yes.
Provide the opportunity and then let private market run with it.
Right.
Exactly. That's where we're headed.
I thought so.
Giant conversation about incentives, So where will be our focus areas? I mean, I would like to make some changes to the downtown one, just because I think that we haven't gotten any of the workforce housing in the North End or any of those areas. So I'd like us to at least look at that and make some changes. So if something that doesn't get built has a second shot at the apple, has to come back, it would be nice to have those changed. So that's my thought process is, look at that and try to, the community space. I know from 10 years on planning board, we've never gotten, most of the community space we get isn't what we had in mind when we wrote the zoning. It's just not.
What's left over?
It's right.
I'll go through those incentives in a second. Before I do that, is there any more sort of discussion on the housing data and the trends?
Do we know how much housing we need? And how much affordable housing is a percentage of our total? Is there a goal? It
There
just
is.
seems like, we need more housing, but what's realistic and is there kind of a goal for how much housing Portsmouth can
I've heard the number for
accommodate?
just our city, but the regional assessment just came out this past week. I haven't gotten through all of it yet, but what I've heard is our number is around 350 to 400.
So,
New affordable, or? So we're deficient by that amount, roughly.
So like you would say, putting words in your mouth,
I can't wait.
I think it's really important. That's an excellent question. Obviously, the question, looking at where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, right, with this data. So if some exterior entity says, I'm going to answer that for you, and here it is, we got to look at that methodology and make sure it's right. Because again, I've seen a lot of bad data get aggregated at the state level, and then it drills itself down. It has its own limitations on how it's collected, and there's definitely a need here. But whether it's whatever 364, we all need to be fair to ourselves to understand, well, what is that number? Why is it that number? And is our data, is this data reflected in their data? Because that number might be half of their data, their output, because their numbers, garbage in, garbage out is how this system works, and it's really hard sometimes to get the data you need to figure out where you're actually standing. Especially, you got a sense here with the status. We got 1,800 units. Okay, everybody can get that number down, but where are they in the process? And I just broke it into 5 categories, and there's all these lags, and some are appealed, and it's important to as you do, everybody here, recognize the complexity of the factor of time here in when housing units are produced and where they arrive and what type they are. I'm hopeful this helps at least give us pause to digest this, and it will be on the webpage. This wasn't meant to be an action-oriented discussion. It's about stimulating discussion, look at the numbers, and think about them, because then we need to answer that question and not assume an outside party has the answer for us, so we don't need, and nobody's saying that, but we need to make sure we have some confidence in what others are telling us we need, and that their data is actually good that generated the output. There's no doubt in my mind we need more, we are going to increasingly need more affordable housing, because it's not going to happen itself. It never does. It's just the way it's the hardest job for government anywhere, is creating affordable housing and dealing with the market failure of it not providing it on its own. So I think in terms of whether you call it workforce or just affordable, less expensive housing, we are going to need that increasingly, unless this place completely falls apart and all the wheels fall off and we're back in 1950, which is not going to happen. When you're in an upwardly mobile context like Portsmouth, it's going to get increasingly logarithmically difficult to achieve housing that people can afford, that are not on high six-digit salaries or have assets of that level. So I think that much we know. How much we need to find the right balance, I don't know it yet. I've always felt like I got to go through this exercise before I can have a cogent conversation about any of those things, because how can you define your needs when you don't understand where you are and where you've come from and where you're likely headed? And this data may stop at 2022, but as you saw, 2/3 of the housing units that came in the preceding 8 years haven't made it to market yet. So we can project forward with this data a solid 5 years to see what's coming without anything new coming in the door, and things new will come in the door. So if the things coming in the door tend to taper because of interest rates or uncertainty in the markets, we've still got all this stuff out there that, yeah, it's affected by interest rates and construction costs, because some of it's not under construction yet. But we got to understand this before we can answer that. But it's an excellent question, and I think we should get the data from Rockingham County and figure out where they got it, figure out how good it is, and if it's good, then we can draw upon it. But I'm not confident in anything till I see the math.
Speaking of which,
would you have said that?
Maybe. The historic build-out of, say, 150 or so houses per year, I wonder if that's changing or has changed recently. If we've got over 600 units under construction right now, and assuming it doesn't take more than a year to build most units, that pace is certainly a lot higher at the moment.
Yes.
Is that going to continue? We don't know. But it may be that could skew some of these projections going forward. So I think we need to consider that as we think about this. And I couldn't agree with you more about the need for design guidelines outside the downtown. You know, Portsmouth is a high-quality town, and the outlying neighborhoods deserve better treatment they've been getting with the regulations. So, yeah, we're going to talk about that at the planning board.
I would just add, I think this is great, the data you guys put together, and it's something that we really need to start the conversation. And so Nick was talking about that, and your point about the gateway, I think that's a good example of where we have an example of a gateway development that's happening with the West End, not the West End Yards, with the Viridian and the Cinemagic site. You've got housing, you've got commercial and retail. How is that? How do we like that, and do we want to do more of that? So that can inform our discussion about the incentives we're going to talk about as we go forward. So I think it's really important. And I think the other thing that I wanted to say was that this is our first take at this data, so it's going to be updated. It's going to be on the website, but I think we're going to put a date on it, and then as we update it, you'll see an updated date, so you'll know that we've spent more time. Howard and Nick have been spending a lot of time on this, but it's still not done. And we'll continue to update it and add more information to round it out and figure out how to do that on the website. But this is all good information, I think, that we're going to be using as we go forward.
Yeah, and I think I did send you three the link to get to the report.
Rockingham,
the Rockingham Planning Commission report. They spent a year doing surveys and collecting data, and actually each of the regional planning commissions across the state did it, and they tried to do it in a similar way so that there were some similar questions in what they were going after, so that it could be comparable from region to region. So I know I haven't had the time this week, just getting back from vacation, to go through all of it yet, but it is on my list of things to look at.
I think we should put it on our list for next meeting to, circulate that report. We can all look at it, talk about it.
It's an electronic link, so I can
Yeah.
forward you all the email that came to me. I can forward to the whole group so you can take a look at it. We can probably even put the link on our website if we wanted to.
Right.
Counselor, may I just also add thank you for doing all this work. That's really terrific, and I know it's a big body of work, and we're lucky to have you so interested in this, in the housing data and being in this business. As somebody who said a lot recently that I think every time we come out of a public meeting, city staff is delegated more and more stuff to do, and that does make a difference in how we operate, and especially when, you know, a third of the comments are saying you're not doing your job well enough or fast enough or not formatting things correctly or anything like that. It's part of, I think, the fact that everybody's working hard and in good faith to do that, and I think this is some really great work out of the planning department. So I just wanted to say thank you on that.
I would hardly agree. Thank you.
Do you want to give the public an opportunity?
Oh, I had one other incentive idea before you do that.
No?
You don't want to go through both sections first?
If people have data questions and not incentive or zoning questions, I would take them now and then go to the zoning, but that's me. But Rick?
If you want to hold on incentive, I've got another possible big idea for incentives, but I can wait.
Yeah, if you could.
Yeah.
Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak regarding just the data?
Okay, just figured.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just looking at our city, it's clear there's a finite amount of land and places to build. And I know we've wrestled with this on the Economic Development Commission as to what's the correct balance. Generally, we were looking at downtown, and we never wanted to see too much residential development and no business development. And I'm just wondering if there's some kind of formula for the ideal city, you know, that has X amount of percentage of housing, so much office, so much retail. You know, I don't know. I've looked and I can't find that information. I don't know if it even exists or if it's even, if you're even able to come up with something like
I'll take a stab at that, and that's all it is. That's all a lot of this is from me, is a stab. I'm not an expert. I'm not a realtor. I'm not a financial analyst. But I think the number one caution that I bring to my mind every time I look at some means-tested data, which is likely what you're going to get for that, is Portsmouth is an outlier. So means-tested data is going to be increasingly less valuable to Portsmouth. We've got a really unique position here, really unique set of assets that people want from the Atlantic seaboard rather than just the region. So we've got this incredible draw. I think there's clearly a need and an importance of having a diversified economy and having Ps and having commercial or non-residential entities support the tax base, support the quality of life of being here. But I'd be surprised if we're out of balance in any substantial way, other than the affordability of being able to either stay here and afford to stay here and pay the taxes and pay for the services, or to move here and not have $1 million to plunk down on a condominium or a small house. I mean, there's a house on Bartlett Street right now that's 1,052 square feet for $500,000. It's $500 a square foot. So what's that? 500, yeah. And it's literally, it would fit in the hole of this table. So that's what's going on in Portsmouth. And
yeah, I understand that, and that's certainly a problem. But I guess I was just thinking, as we think about housing and how much housing we need, how much can our city support, and how much can we realistically expect Portsmouth to have for housing? I mean, do you start taking over the industrial park and converting that, or do you convert retail over, and what does that do, to your mix? So I think
that's a
there's
really
any answer, because every community is unique like that. But I think it's something to think about. What's your balance of housing to business to?
Portsmouth, of course, has a lot of the business for the region that, come
Yeah.
here to work. And I know that on the regional side of this, because I am the representative on the Rockingham Planning Commission, we spend a lot of time, and I already have at least one representative from Greenland who wants to sit down with me and talk about what we can possibly do together. So
Yeah, I
I am
think that's a
trying.
great idea,
I'm trying to have those regional conversations. I'm trying to incentivize them to let's at least sit down and talk, because there's
Yeah.
something we can do. It's just those are longer, much longer conversations to try to have when you're dealing with a whole nother town. But
Right.
I am working to try to have those conversations, because I do think that our neighboring towns really need to help. And I know Rye has actually been doing a lot of development and bringing in a lot of housing, which is going to help the area as well. Because, they're a town that doesn't probably have a whole lot of industry like we do, but we need to be able to support the workers in a nearby location. So the conversation's happening. It's a slow one, and it's hard to get everyone knocking on your door to want, but at least I put out the offer to talk to any of the other members, and I at least had one willing to talk to me. So I think that's pretty exciting. I'm hoping that we get there on that conversation.
I've worked with a lot of big teams working on new towns throughout the country and enhancements to existing downtowns. And to answer your question, it's a point in time analysis that can be done, so it changes and evolves over time. And what the analysts do, I'm not the economic guy, but I work with those people, and they do void analysis. And the void analysis can project what's missing in a market at a particular point in time. What land use regulations can do, because we shouldn't be looking at just 2023, we have to take the long view. Portsmouth regulations downtown already do this to a certain degree by saying no residential on the first floor.
Right.
And let the upper floors vary with the market as the market changes over time. And there could be more flexibility there, but that's how this is addressed in a small way. Now, the bigger issues like industrial uses and the big commercial uses, those are much bigger issues that need, and that's back to public policy that I mentioned earlier also. So to answer your question, you can't answer it in a long-term way. You can answer it today.
Right.
You can answer it for the next 6 months, but we should be thinking 10, 20, 30, 40 years out.
Well, we probably have this philosophical discussion go on for hours, but
Right.
What's good, and the good news for Portsmouth, unlike some other communities that grapple with where I think you're coming from, Portsmouth does not have either a goal or an implementation strategy of displacing large commercial or industrial users and replacing them with housing. What Portsmouth has been doing, at least for the last 8 to 10 years, if not longer, but on the implementation side in the last 10 years, has fast-tracked what I think economists would argue is the highest and best use of almost all these projects, which is mixed-use projects. So there's commercial on the ground floor and upper floor whatever, often residential. That generates the most money and the most economic vitality for the neighborhood and the community, and that's where we've been focused. So in fairness to a good question, are we going to stay in that track, or there's plenty of conversations that come up about putting housing in Pease or putting housing on Commerce Way? Again, not from maybe a majority of people, but you hear these things occasionally. That really opens up the question I think you're raising about or Ritchie, the Ritchie property on Banfield, is that the right move for the community? And it's a fair question. And what's its effect on Pike and everybody going to be if we go into those industrial areas? So, fair point, and I think we need to keep that on the table. Do you want me to go into the incentives?
Yeah, we're at the end of hour 2. Let's go forward.
Okay, so in the character districts, which is essentially the form-based zoning for downtown Portsmouth and the West End, which is shown on the zoning map here with all these colors, the West End being down here and the downtown North End being with the green color in there for the municipal properties. This zoning was adopted in 2000 2014, I think, was the first iteration downtown, and then 2015, we did the north end. In late 15, early 16, the west end. There are 2 overlay districts in those character districts. One is called the North End Incentive Overlay District, shown up here on the map in the north end. And then the west end down here in the blue dotted line that picks up 105 Bartlett. And the West End Yards is actually a gateway zone property, so it's not in the west end zoning. That's over here. So we have these 2 overlay districts, and I would argue the way we adopted them is the way they've worked. When we created these incentive overlay districts after doing a pretty extensive community outreach and input section, the goal downtown, where we had most of our development opportunity, was the north end. The primary goal was to secure the greenway along the North Mill Pond so you could walk from Market Street all the way eventually through down to Bartlett Street. But again, this was done a year and a half later down in the West End. So the goal was to have this public walkway along the waterfront. So we did set up an incentive that allowed I'm going to call them a builder, developer, applicant, whatever word you want to choose. The applicant had 2 choices if they wanted a taller building or a bigger building, meaning, let's call it fatter, bigger footprint. So if you wanted a bigger footprint or you wanted an extra story on top of your building, you had to provide either the community space, which is in 12 or 13 forms, from wide sidewalks, alleyways, squares, parks, greenways. There's a menu of what we call community space in the ordinance. You have to provide 20% or more of your property, your land area, as community space if you want a taller building, or it's 30% of your land if you want a bigger building, meaning the footprint. So we've had a lot of, I would argue, success. This is a debatable point, right? Whether we should have been prioritizing workforce housing or community space. But when this was adopted, the priority was community space. That's why the choice was given to the applicant. You choose one or the other. We're not going to force you to do workforce. We're not going to force you to do community space, but you got to choose one. And clearly, the economic interests are significantly leaning towards community space because the developer benefits from that improved space on the value of what they're building. And clearly, workforce housing is a financial loser to the builder. They've got to subsidize the number of units that are in the building, and they usually cost more to build than they do to sell. So that's a financial disincentive to do workforce housing. So when they had the choice of community space or workforce housing, big surprise, everybody chose the community space, which was somewhat by design, because when we put in the workforce housing in 2014 with the zoning, it was a very latent issue that came to the city council, probably in the second reading of the zoning, saying, hey, we need some affordable housing, some workforce housing. Can you guys stick something in there under the incentive that might create some, because we have a need for it? And all we could come up with was something very quickly that established how much workforce housing needs to go into this set of incentive districts. And clearly, it didn't work to achieve any. We had one project come along at 88 Maplewood, 161 Deer Street at the corner where Wells Fargo is. The previous owner proposed to do, I think, only 5 workforce housing units. They didn't build the project, they've sold the project, and it was just approved with 18 or something market rate units. So we have not achieved any workforce housing units in the North End, but again, I would argue, because I was here and worked on this, that was not our primary objective with that zoning. It was to achieve the Greenway, again, all as a byproduct, not of our opinions, but the public opinions that came to us through the charrettes of the North End. That's what people wanted. So that's what the zoning delivered on. And, somewhat unfortunate, and it might as well mention it, the conceptual building heights that were agreed upon by the public and our outside consultants that were presented in our charrette were actually taller, 5-story buildings all over the place. And in order to procure the community space, or in the off chance workforce housing, we actually had to lower those heights in order to then put it back in with the incentive, because New Hampshire does not allow you to mandate either workforce housing or take someone's land without compensating them for your greenway or your wide sidewalk. So we actually took the zoning and lowered the baseline height only to give it back in exchange for one of those two benefits. So that's how the North and West End incentives work. I'm going to just quickly show you some examples of what we got. You've seen them all. So that what's the incentive? What's the carrot for the, call them the developer? They either get an additional story in height, so a taller building by 1 story, and or a larger footprint. They need 20% community space for an added story. They need 30 for a footprint that's too big. Or keyword, or workforce housing. And they're all choosing this, again, because it's in their interest, and it was also set up by design to be the more important for the community when this was adopted. So we ended up, this hasn't been built, 89 foundries across the foundry parking garage. But that has community space in the form of the pocket park that hasn't yet been built in front of the garage, wide sidewalks. There's a pocket park here at 145 Maplewood on the corner. There's wider sidewalks, and then there's a public access alleyway beside that building that we have deeded rights to. All these things we have deeded rights to, so they're not just, hey, we'll build a park and maybe you can come here, maybe you don't. All of these things go to the city council for approval. So in perpetuity, and I think 10 years from now when we see these projects get built and you see the Greenway from Market Street to Maplewood Ave, it's going to be pretty fantastic for people to get on that. But we don't see it yet because there's a lot of work that needs to go into designing it, permitting it, and getting these projects also ready for construction that are along the North Mill Pond. This is the AC Hotel. So all these two here have no housing even in them, but they do have community space, and they achieved it through the incentive overlay. So a lot of people forget this, but there are projects outside those overlay districts that also have an incentive. And here's 2 examples. The Housing Authority, in order to get that building as tall as it is and as big as it is, the footprint, they needed to provide 30% community space, and they did with the improved space in front between the Feaster and the proposed building. And the city has easements on that, despite who might own it in the future. The city has a deeded right to use this space. The same with the Brick Market, all those alleyways that go between the Rera and the Tuscan. All that's community space that was improved and laid out by the developer, and we have easements on it. Why did they need that? Why did they provide it? It was because they have a building footprint here that exceeds the size that was allowed in the district. You have to have an acre or more of land outside the overlay districts to even ask for that incentive. Okay, so that's downtown. The gateway districts, we have a G1 and a G2, and they largely are strapped on the Spalding and Route 1 with these outlying parcels where the Community Connect Church, if that's what it's called, that area here on Market Street. So here we are going, that's Sagamore Creek, so you're seeing here's the iHeart Radio in here, and then down towards Rye, where we've got the Cinemagic or the Southgate Plaza, and a bunch.
They call it Portsmouth Green now.
What, that plaza? Okay. Shows you what I know. All right. So how does it work in the gateway districts? Simply, there are 3 incentives that are provided in those gateway districts. One is to get added height, one is to get a bigger footprint, similar to downtown, and the other is get a higher density, a higher number of units per acre, a bigger project on the ground. If you take more than, if you take one of these 3, you've got to provide 20% workforce housing, and if you take more than one of the 3, you've got to do both, the green space, the community space, and the workforce housing. So a good example is This is the Cinemagic. It's not built. This is, I think, 91 units, and 18 are workforce housing, and they have 20% community space, so they've taken parking there and created a park, some pickleball courts, and a dog park to meet their 20% obligation and have 18 units in there be workforce housing. That one, again, has not started, but it's been approved, and it's likely to start, barring some problem on their side, this year. Here's the West End Yards. So it kind of is in the West End, but it was put in the Gateway District, and I think that's because we passed the Gateway District just before we did the West End zoning. So it's 273 units. I think there's 27 workforce housing units here. It is a mixed-use development, and it has both community space along Hodgkins Brook, as well as within the site, and workforce housing. This one's under construction now at 3400 Lafayette. I believe it's 50 units and a townhouse design. It only used one incentive. It only needed community space. So that's all it has, no workforce housing. All these projects did not use any incentives. This is the Viridian out at whatever you just said that's now called. Yep. This is the Westerly, and this is Chimberg's development at Hannaford in the West End Overlay District. So they didn't use incentives, but yet when you look at these images, these are really big buildings. So I think what clearly, I got a typo there, what it tells me is the underlying density is probably too high for the incentive to work. Most projects in the Gateway District do not do workforce housing. Why? Because they're making enough money. It's big enough without asking for another story. And even Cinemagic, right? They came in and got a 5th floor, and probably the footprint's too big. They've come back with a modification and taken the 5th floor off, but they're still giving us the, they made the unit sizes smaller, and they're giving us the 18 workforce housing units. But I'm not even sure they still needed to, because they actually decided to get rid of the 5th floor, probably because of market conditions. So we're allowing a lot to happen here sort of as of right, without any carrots or sticks. So I think it's worth evaluating as we move forward, recalibrating the incentives and the underlying density. When I look at this, the data tells me we probably allowed too much as the baseline volume, because we can't make these 6 or 7 stories for a whole host of reasons. Opposition from the community, the neighborhood, but the method of construction changes as soon as you go above 5 floors. You can't do the stick frame podium construction. The cost, it's concrete and steel. It becomes prohibitively expensive. In fact, the AC Hotel was in a district that the zoning allows a 70-foot building and a 6-story building. They couldn't do it because they would have lost money making it a story taller, because they couldn't have built it the way they built it. So that's something we didn't know when we did the code, but we learned that by getting input. So a lot of these buildings are 4 and 5 stories. We can't simply say, okay, well, let's give you 2 floors to do workforce. They're not going to be able to make the numbers work if they go to a 6-story building. So we have to probably evaluate, in my opinion, lowering the baseline density in order to get the workforce housing out the other side. Okay, so this is the last section, and Howard's going to quickly talk about the public involvement plan moving forward and how we're going to address the incentives. But before he does that, maybe your big idea, we can start with that, right? On the incentives?
Well, most of the development downtown, as we all know, has happened on parking lots recently, when you haven't just redeveloped. And one thing that came up on the Blue Ribbon Committee that I was involved with 8 or 10 years ago, something like that, was the idea of not allowing private surface parking lots in the downtown as an allowed use anymore. And that would require the city to step up to do more public parking in the form of garages. But if that was coupled with an incentivized means of redeveloping parking lots, which would sort of be a reverse. A lot of the parking lots that are downtown, I understand, used to have historic buildings on them, and that's part of the genesis for the historic district. And there are parking lots still, even though we've got Russell Street and even Brick Market and Pleasant Street, and, you know, you start ticking things off. A lot of them are parking lots that ought to be buildings, but they can't be buildings yet without public parking. So that's kind of a big idea. Twofold idea: incentive, but also public parking, no private surface parking lots. Too big an idea. People are just scared to death.
It's quite a concept.
It's been done.
Yeah. Just one thing I've thought of is, obviously, to me anyways, on the planning board, the community space downtown is, I guess the way I envision it is, people are coming to downtown to use that community space, amongst other amenities and everything else. Whereas out in the gateway districts, that community space is more for the residents of that particular area. And so I think one thing, just to, I guess myself, steering more, I don't know if we should, I think we need to strengthen the community space downtown. I think we've, given up a lot of sidewalks. So I'd like to see, you know, certainly strengthen and really kind of enforce, so to speak, the pocket parks and all that sort of stuff, and making sure the connectivity is all working and everything else. But I think out in the gateway districts, I think that is where we could potentially flip and say, look, you know, your community space, that's up to you, kind of from a market perspective. You know, you got to entice people to come live at your development, so you're going to put in some, you know, dog parks, pickle, you know, amenities for your residents. However, as a city, we care about the workforce, so that's what you got to do out here. You know, we may still want some community space, but it's not as critical to me, anyways, as downtown. So
I wonder, and I know it's it was one or the other downtown, but the gateway, you can do both. But I believe we insisted on workforce housing first. So we do insist workforce housing first. You give us that, and you still want more, then you can give us community space. But I know that the vision, when we first started looking at the downtown, and you're right, the Greenway was a big conversation. People really wanted not just community space, they wanted green space. That really didn't truly happen. And I think that's the downfall, is we called it community space, and we, you know, because you can't insist that everything be green. But I really feel like, if I'm remembering from all the conversations and all the charrettes and all the meetings that we went to back then, it was people wanted more parks, more pocket parks, more places to hang out. But which isn't a bad idea. It's just that's not entirely what we got out of what happened.
And I don't want to, you know, spin this in the community space discussion, but yeah, certainly. And I think the biggest thing it's kind of lacking is the connectivity between, like, you have adjacent developments and they come up with their community space plan, and it works, but it's not, there's no connectivity between the adjacent parcels. And that was one thing, the Greenway, that was the idea behind that. But
Can I just speak to that? Because I think you guys are raising a really good point that I think is going to fall away when this stuff gets built. Probably what we're lacking, to avoid people saying things like, I thought it would be more green space. We know what our target was, and our target is what we're achieving, but we're not seeing what we're achieving because it's not yet built.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of this is under appeal. A lot of so it can get challenging, I'm sure, as a permit granting official, let alone a member of the public, to actually understand whether we're getting ripped off or we got a good deal for these trades, right? And I would argue, when we're here in 10 years and we see that Greenway from Market Street to Maplewood, and we see the boat launch, we see the deck, it's all public access, it's all improved, and the kayaks are sitting there. It's not a heap of rubble. It doesn't look like Beirut. We're going to feel, and you have a deeded right to go there, I think we're going to say, wow, now I get it, you know, and everybody here also gets that we've got a multitude of owners out there, and we just can't go out there like China and take it all and just make this thing happen. We've got to use this process and land bank things like the the hotel did in giving us an acre and a half in the middle of that block between Market and Maplewood. I think what would really help the decision makers and the public is to have that long-range plan, that master plan for the types of community spaces that we're trying to achieve, knowing that it's not perfect, it's a concept, and things are going to be a little bit different as the projects develop and time passes. We're just not tasting the fruits of our trades because things take time to come to fruition. But I do think that we have achieved a lot. Should it be built in accordance with what's been approved?
Well, I think you bring up a good point because, ultimately the same goal is envisioned out in the Gateway District. We have the pedestrian bike walkway in front of that one down there. The Westerly, that goes to nothing. But if that was to occur,
that's
then,
30 years.
yeah. Well, that's
right, but it is.
And so, but yeah, I guess I still don't quite go back on my comment from before because I think we have to look 30 years out, but we also have to look right now too. So
I'm in agreement on the Gateway, and I think it's worth, given the percentages of community space that are utilized in the Gateway District are based on the urban percentages. They're too low. I mean, the 3400 Lafayette project with 50 townhouses under construction right now from the Green Company. That site, I think, is like 10 acres large or more, and most of it is wetlands or buffer. And we're getting it as community space where, yeah, it's marginally, if at all, developable, but it has benefits to the people that aren't there yet. But if we're good at our job, we're going to build this connectivity together. We need a master plan for all these back lots because there's a development next to it from 1955 that has a connection to this large open space area, and a sewer pipe goes through it. We have an easement on the sewer pipe, and you can drive on it, but there's no public access. Now we're going to have that. So we can start in less than 30 years, if we're smart about it, connecting and forcing these builders to not just give us a deed or a deeded right to go there, but make some improvements along the way. So there's a sign in that 1955 development, and there's one in the industrial street on the other side, and you can connect through. So I'm with you. We need to look at whether we're getting enough community space out of the Gateway projects that aren't just parking lots and buildings, but often have a lot of natural resources around and beside them that would be good to lock up, even if the community benefit is that they're always going to remain that way and we can see them.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that is a beautiful sewer easement back there, by the way, too. Yeah. But yeah, I almost just wonder if that's something different than community space, because it's a bigger vision, I guess, than.
I think what you're all saying is almost the same thing, learning from the recent past.
Yep.
You're saying maybe the base threshold is too high of what's allowed as of right, and, every one of you are saying, well, we thought we were going to get this, but we were getting the, we didn't get X, we got Y. So that's a refinement. And, just learn from what's happening. Right, exactly. Yep.
All right, can we finish the presentation and try to get through this before lunchtime?
Well, you better go fast, Howard.
I usually eat late.
I have a business I'm ignoring at the moment, so.
Well, what was spoken about in the first meeting on the Land Use Committee that I attended last month was conceptual, and so what we're doing with what I'm presenting here is talking a little bit with a little bit more clarity of what we're going to be doing to engage the public. And what I mean by engage the public involvement plan is not necessarily going to be dwelling down specific to 7 sites. It's going to be talking about the housing, and as my role as a housing navigator, what was spoken about by Nick is how, where, and what's it going to look like. So with that,
program and process, what I am referring to here is there's already some framework that's been established that we're going to build upon. There's been previous efforts. The City of Portsmouth did a community engagement report that was completed last year. We're going to be using that as some basis. And as my role in grant-based, New Hampshire listens, the Plan New Hampshire, and the UNH Housing Academy, which I've been participating in, and Nick has as well. They've come up with certain programming and means and methods to how to go out and engage the public. We'll be doing that as well, but of course we'll be taking those and customizing them specific to what occurs in Portsmouth. It's a unique community. We're going to make sure what we do is, meets that. But as I spoke about, we talked a little bit about concept last. Now we're talking a little bit more finite ideas. What I spoke about last is the difference between outreach and engagement. So I'll be talking first about outreach. And if you recall from our conversation during the last meeting, we came up with a list of who we're going to speak to. And that had to do with real estate, that had to do with bankers. And one way to think about that outreach is we're going to go out and we're going to talk to people that are informative about housing, not necessarily the experts in housing. So those that can inform what housing could and could not occur, how it would occur, again, having to do with banks. Another part of the informative, I'll speak to some of the data that Nick spoke about earlier on. There's 37 ADU units that were applied for. The 35 that we started seeing at the end takes into consideration that there were 2 ADU units that just stopped. They never proceeded. So part of our reaching out is to speak to those 2 people. Why'd you stop? What are the barriers in place? So those are people that will be informative about how we're going to create specific, the ADU type of housing. It's important for us to go out and meet these people to be informed, because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come up with a survey, both online and virtual and in person. Part of the thing, the engagement report that spoke about in public realms, that there were certain event days citywide, and we could certainly go out and be standing under a tent and having people start coming through and engaging them about housing. And so everybody has, and that's a citizen, has a perception about what housing. We want to make sure that that's well balanced and well rounded. What we saw up on the screen earlier was this large scale. We want to be able to also speak to the different scales that it could occur. The informant interviews, we're going to be talking to developers of scale that could add on additions all the way up to the larger scale. We want to make sure that when we reach out to the public in these in-public realms, we're able to speak to them and they can speak to us about the different scale of how this housing could be accommodated. So that outreach effort is then going to lead us into engagement. And we go out into, and we're not sure yet, we're going to figure out more about the neighborhood meetings. And these neighborhood meetings aren't the charrettes, they aren't specific to workshop. They're going to be presentation of what these different housing could look like, what they have looked like, and what we want to also do with this first step of the neighborhood meetings is listen. We want to make sure that we can hear from the community members, the citizens, the residents, what they're seeing and what they like and what they don't like of what they're seeing and what's occurring. And what was spoken about before about the how, the where, but it's also an understand the look. And so these areas are going to be district-based because there's certain identities that people have over in different districts of the city. We want to be able to gather during our informative meetings the ability, and it goes along with what Nick and I have done with the data assessment, is as we listen, we want to be informed to these members of the public because we anticipate that it's going to be, we want this, we don't want this. If it could happen, how would it happen? And so we want to be well-rounded. And so we're going to be going, the next step would be an exercise session where we go and say, we heard you in the first listening session. These are the ideas. This is possible ways that it could occur. And then we're going to get more into what would happen in terms of policy at that point. And Nick's going to speak a little bit later on about what we're going to be doing with policy. But the engagement, then the third step would become presentation of findings, but it won't stop there. That's more of a wrap-up for this first phase, this first step.
Do you want me to do this real quick?
Yeah.
We're reaching out to consultants that are on the state-approved list of consultants to look at, they list 3 categories of potential scope of work: needs analysis and planning, regulatory audits, and regulatory development. I'm sensing, given the needs part, we're not there yet. We got to calibrate it with what's coming in from the study you guys did with RKG and what the Rockingham Planning Commission thinks. But presuming we can get to our needs analysis step without maybe a consultant, we would want to use them clearly to look at a regulatory audit of how things are working or not and help us with code development. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. This is almost the last slide. Just to reiterate what Howard said, this is about the how, where, and the what. And the what is the type of housing as well as what it looks like. And importantly, to Bob's earlier question, it's the how much. That's what we got. And we can't get there without doing some rigorous data analysis, which we're just starting to do today with the data that we've presented. And then developing the second step, which is a needs assessment, calibrating these, what other people are saying our needs assessment is, look at our data, are they right, they wrong, do we need to adjust it? And then identify the stakeholders that need to be interviewed and discussed, and then have a public process so we're not running around chasing things that the data may not substantiate as our need. And then obviously take action with recommendations to do both regulatory changes as well as non-regulatory changes. And I just listed a few to, again, get the juices flowing for the next conversation. We're going to talk about these underlying densities or the knobs and levers with the gateway districts to make sure we've got it right. And we're going to get a better batting average than 27 units out of 10 projects in the Gateway District. We should look at considering overlay districts maybe in addition or on top of the Gateway so we can better obtain workforce housing. There are certainly properties outside the Gateway District that would benefit from an overlay, a floating overlay district, to be able to, again, have a conditional use permit and mandate, if you get that you do workforce housing. Adopt the ADU amendments. I think we do need to continue the conversation. Maybe it's not high on the list, but assisted living, senior housing, and incentives for micro units, those are all things that I think we shouldn't forget, despite what we did with the ADUs, moving that forward. I think in light of smaller projects, the medium and low density multifamily projects, those folks, tend to get a free ride. They're not contributing to their fair share of supporting workforce housing. They're too small to provide it on site. They might be 10 units or might be 8. But many communities have a payment in lieu option and have an affordable housing trust or something that can receive those funds and put them towards a first-time home buyers program, whatever the housing authority is doing, or someone else. So I think we need to make this as fair and equitable as we can, and not just rely on giant developers to provide us workforce housing. I think we should continue to support what the PHA is doing, wherever they're doing it, figure out, work together is what support means, and see if we can find the delta so we all benefit from what the housing authority provides the city. And as we started the conversation, looking at city properties for workforce housing opportunities. And I think, this is demonstrated to at least the planning staff. We need to better track our progress and trends so we get out ahead of this and we're not all headed down certain individual or collective goals and objectives that aren't substantiated by the data, because we actually don't know the data. So we're going to make a point in the planning department to keep this database current and track it monthly, so we'll have a database in a central place. Anybody can grab the data and see what's actually happening, and we can recalibrate what we're doing here from a regulatory and non-regulatory standpoint. To hit this last few words, we've got some we've got some significant community concerns and issues and even community goals that are not being met by wherever you come on that spectrum of interest, pro-housing, anti-housing, too much here, too much there, wrong location. We've got to make sure in this process we address those community needs and hopefully do it effectively. That's it.
I just want to add that he talked about how there's a list of approved consultants to work with, and we are required to go off of that list, and that's because of the $82,000 or $83,000 HOP grant that we got that's hiring the consultant to help us with this. So just so everyone knows, we are required by that grant to use that list of approved people under the program.
There's a pretty, and it's a robust list.
It's extensive, yeah.
There's plenty of choice.
All right. Any other questions or comments from the committee? I know there's a lot of information to digest. I think we should digest it and maybe add to it at our next meeting. We can fold in the additional information that just came out this week and make it a slightly more detailed. We'll keep finalizing and before we start to move forward.
And I thought, Nick, that you were, at the beginning of the meetings, you wanted everybody to stay.
I did.
And I can see why, and there's a lot of data here that, so thank you for the people that did stay. I know it was a long morning.
It's recorded. We can tell
Hopefully
them all to go in.
It's not intuitive.
Yeah, right.
Unless anyone else has comments on the committee, members from the public would like to come up and talk about the last hour and a half of information. I barely can as well.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. I'll go quickly because they're people that are far better than I. Paige Trace, Portsmouth. Number one, Nick, thank you very, very much for this presentation. It was extensive and it was really informative. I have two questions, two thoughts as to the new development out behind the cemetery that you were referring to.
Parsons Woods.
Right, thank you, off of Beverly Hill Road, am I correct?
Yes.
I would call that a developer's maximization of profit margin. And somewhere along the line, we had a land grab. Obviously, we have precious little land left. Very smart developers all over town. It goes without saying that anything that's usable is probably in the hands of someone, somewhere. So then it becomes the question of what is the appropriate development for Gateway or for an area like that? And does the city have any sway whatsoever, community involvement or otherwise, to have some sense of control over what a developer decides to do to maximize their profits? Is that a number of units per zone and a zoning issue where you can leverage what you can offer a developer and have effect on the number of units? To that effect, I'm also confused about your use of the word workforce housing, particularly as it pertains down to Route 1 and to the West End, with West End Yards, because I remember very distinctly that got down to the point with a past planning department manager that we were literally down to 5 units of workforce housing. Now you're saying it's 27.
27.
And I'd like to know what the definition then is for workforce housing for those units.
Yep.
Number two, we talk about community involvement and community engagement and grants. I know recently it's a bone of contention, and I do not live on South Street. So there are far more educated people who were directly involved with this. But I sit there and I say, we're using grants to continue a 3-dimensional housing project in the South End, and we're continuing that grant by scaring older people in the neighborhood. Because all that's happening is someone walking on their property, which is trespass, if they don't have permission, and is threatening the people and taking photographs of the back of their yards. That's trespass. And a statement of intent is not permission. So I really would like to know whether we can't use those grants somewhere else within the HDC or the Historic District to address some of the questions that you have here as they pertain to the Historic District, rather than scaring people, because that was another public relations disaster. And it didn't affect me, and I hope it doesn't. But I do think we don't live in the Soviet bloc, and so it'd be nice if we got permission before we entered people's property. Unless, of course, it's fire or police with a warrant, and I hope that never happens to any of us here either. I understand that there was a disconnect, and I understand that, Peter, you tried to take care of it, and thank you for doing that. But I do have a question when it comes to community interaction, because thus far we haven't seen much of it that's been handled well. And so there's obviously a breakdown in communication. But thank you again for this. I think it's great. And I think that, did I say something incorrectly?
No, I was trying to answer him.
Okay. I think there are others today that could probably address what happened.
No, well, we don't need to respond. It's just a public.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if you want to stick around, I have a response to those 3 questions.
No, I think that any of this should be responded to publicly at a different point, as it was stated by the person that the council approved his doing it. So it goes further. But thank you.
Fine.
Thank you very much.
And anyone else like to come up and speak?
Well, it's still morning, so we're good. Sorry I was late. Elizabeth Bradder, property owner, 159 McDonough Street. The first thing I'd like to suggest is that if you want to know how much rents are in Portsmouth, you should go on to all the websites, as opposed to asking people to fill out a survey and telling them, don't worry about the fact that your taxes are going to go up if you fill out that survey honestly, because your assessment's going to go up. So most of those surveys are probably not filled out honestly or not filled out at all. So if you go into the apartments.com, Craigslist, Marketplace, or talk to local realtors, you'll get a better idea. I'm pretty sure that workforce housing is identified by the state. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And as someone who reads all those things that go to the state on a way too often business, I would suggest that maybe we look at that and see if that's a realistic thing. I find the math that's done to figure out workforce housing is based on mean income for your city, I believe. And
For the region.
For the region, yeah, because I think it's a little
market,
askew
labor
when you
market.
have people who can afford $3 million condos in Portsmouth, that their income might be a little higher than the person who's working at McDonald's at $15 an hour, and that kind of skews the regional thing. But that's a concern, because I think that number's pretty high. It's not necessarily cheap. The concern I have in regards to development is I think development needs to be balanced, as all of you spoke about. My biggest concern is that we don't start, people perceive us as Little Boston, because we have theater, we have music, we have pretty much everything they have in Boston, only it's here in Portsmouth, and we're very lucky to have that. But we don't want to turn into Little New Jersey. No offense to those who come from New Jersey and think it's a beautiful place, but when you drive through New Jersey, you have a certain connotation of what that looks like. And that's what worries me about some of the amount of development that we're doing, and some of the look, as you spoke of, having lived in Germany when there were 2 sides to Germany, you could tell the difference by looking at those square buildings and rectangles that we have now built in Portsmouth. They also have a beautiful one in Dover, which we don't want to talk about. In regards to incentives, I think it would be nice if there were tax incentives for those of us who are smaller unit people. We have just a few units in Portsmouth, and we try to keep our prices low, although they've had to go up anytime you do a repair, or if you replace anything. It's usually around $10,000, it seems to be, for any heating system or anything like that. So the cost has really gotten high, but in order to keep things reasonably priced, there might be tax incentives, which would be something to think about. In regards to incentives, I find it very disconcerting and have often been to meetings where I have talked about the double dipping concept. So developer gets an incentive for height or whatever, and then they want to get more height. So I spend a lot of time showing up and talking about this is double dipping because they already got an incentive for height, but now they want to add another story beyond that. And to me, that shouldn't even be a topic of discussion. I guess they have the right to do that, but I think once you take the incentive, that's what you get. What you see is what you get. The other thing I'd like to see, to think about in regards to the Gateway area, where you were talking about the fact that they already have a lot of availability, would be maybe to make the amount of required green space, not the community space, but the required green space to be a bigger amount. And that may incentivize there being more green space automatically on those bigger lots. You said that a lot of them come pretty big and they can put pretty big houses on those lots, but maybe looking at how much green space is required for those larger lots. I also believe strongly, after watching all the Greenway development go on, anything beyond the 50-foot setback for wetlands is not development. That's a fact. I'm pretty sure Peter Britz can confirm that or not, but you can't develop on that usually in New Hampshire. And I personally think that if you provide that as part of your incentive, it should count differently. You couldn't develop on there anyway, and then you give it to the city and you say, here, that's part of our 20%. So I think that should have a different value. We still want to preserve that, or they should be required to do more restoration in that. One of the developments along the North Mill Pond is doing very minimal restoration, almost none, but they're providing part of the gateway, the greenway, but that 50-foot wetland buffer is not being changed at all. Yet another developer on another part of that same greenway is doing a lot of, the city is doing a lot of, you're doing a whole restoration of that corner lot. So I think if you're going to give it and you're going to count it towards your 20%, it should be counted differently, or it should be required that it be restored to whatever restoration is needed per the environmental people. And that's it from me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Peter Huda, 280 South Street. Nick, I think this was great. I think you gave us a good baseline of history on this. A lot of us were looking for that and looking at the statistics. A lot of us look at the numbers. In the big picture on this, I would ask this board to look at the big question of, at this point in time, with the amount of space we have in Portsmouth, do we really need incentives besides workforce housing? That's the big question in my mind. We spoke here about how much land we have, how much land available we have left for the city, and I guess at a point in time when these were put in there, the incentives were thought to be a good thing and move developers forward. But looking at the history that you presented and the amount of developers that actually took advantage of the workforce housing, it was obvious a while ago and still is that that obviously needs to be changed. So the simple thing to me would be to look to remove any incentives for open space, because the other part of this that I don't feel was enforced was any type of enforcement of this. Developers would come in and say, we're going to give you your 20%. Then they come back and say, oh, we can't do that. West End Yards is a typical example of this. We had no enforcement. If we're going to work this hard to do all of this work to put something on the books, we need to either take out the loopholes or just eliminate it and make it simple. That Portsmouth wants workforce housing, and this is the way that you get it. And just say, so those are my first few comments. I guess the other thing that I would question that we had previously is the description of community space. Having sat through all these meetings and being on a lot of the planning meetings, we had sidewalks, we had planters, we had space between two hotels with entryways that were considered community space. I really don't believe that the community would take advantage of those, a lot of those, and in some cases they couldn't. But these were given for this. So I think in some ways the community space incentive was a little abused. I would also ask that as far as the suggestion made by Chair Chelman, that if we do decide to take the parking lots away, that we put back the requirement in all our districts to put parking in any development that we do. So we don't come back down to having to look for another place for another parking garage. As far as a lot of citizens that have been here a long time, that would be a complete nightmare again when we're struggling for recreation needs, we're struggling for housing, and we have the opportunity now to actually put that in, and I would urge you to take advantage of that if Mr. Chelman's suggestion moves forward. I think the question, the only other question I would have is when you started this presentation, Nick, you said this data was 20 up to 2020, and you inserted some of the other ones, and you would be updating it. I would ask that you update all of the presentations that you were giving to the public, I guess in a kind of a timely manner. So there's a lot of stuff here for you guys to look at and for us to absorb if we're going to give you intelligent feedback. Sure. So I would ask that it would be put in there.
It's all 2022 except for that one chart that was drawn from non-Portsmouth data. So it's all 2022. Except for the one chart I pulled out.
Page.
Yeah.
Well, I know the population isn't 2022.
No, yeah.
Population.
I don't
right,
have
front page.
population in
Right,
2022.
right. So that
chart is not 2022.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know that I can update that or take it. I don't know that that would be fruitful. All the data that I presented from Portsmouth is 15 to 22. 15 to 22.
Okay.
It's only that one sheet I grabbed from somebody else and stuck in there.
Because I would just ask to keep us up on
Yep,
all of it, on the rest of this, so we could we could help you. Thank you.
Yep.
Liza Hewitt, 726 Middle Road. I too, Nick, good job. And I wish that that what you could do was put that piece that you gave, not the whole meeting, but the piece, the presentation, with your comments and your descriptions and the PowerPoint into some type of module that could go on the website, easy for people to find, because I would hate to see that all of that work was for four of us sitting here in the audience. It was great. It explained a lot. It explained a lot of the questions that residents have. And if the city manager and her thing that she puts out could highlight that and say, here's the module, click it on. This may answer some of the housing questions for the residents. I think that would be awesome, and it would be a good use of time to do that. So that's great. Incentives, I think, this is me, but I think incentives should be non-negotiable. I mean, that's where the problems come in. You do all this work, the zoning, you write the regulations, and then people come before you in land use boards and want exceptions to every incentive, everything that you've put out there. And really, it should be non-negotiable. Otherwise, why is it in writing? So you look at West End Yards. I mean, that was a classic, and I know that a lot of work was done to make the gateway. I understand why the gateway was developed. But then to immediately have West End Yards come back and say, sorry, we can't make it work. We still want our density. We still want our height, but we're only going to give you 10%, not 20%. We're not going to give it at the 60% level. It should have been non-negotiable. Well, then you don't get the extra. That's all. And I really like what Corey said about the bit around incentives, the open space incentives in that gateway. I don't have a dog, but if I had a dog, I would not take my dog to the chain link fence area at West End Yards to walk it. It's not community space for 22,000 people. It's community space for the 250 people that are living in West End Yards. So, you know, they got, again, like, look at all of the incentives that they were given. And I'm not sure they should have been given that because they got more. And I don't think a little park area in the back there is going to be used by anybody except the people that are living there. And so I think it's different downtown than it is out there. And then my final, which I don't know whether this will ever happen, but I would really like to have somebody have a discussion around workforce housing and what it means and what the definitions are and where we're headed with that in the city. Because it seems to me, and I don't know all the ins and outs, and this is just what I hear, see in the newspaper, hear you all discuss, that a project like Court Street was not at 60% perhaps, but maybe the income was a little bit higher. So we're looking at a different population of people. And so when you're talking about building workforce housing at Sherburne or anywhere else, I'd like to know what the workforce is that you're building that for, because it seems that there are presently sort of different layers of that, and I don't think that we're being honest with people about who that's being built for. Are we now moving from that list that you said, Craig, that you have 600 people on to a new list of other people have talked about the teachers and the police officers that can't live in the city? Is that who you're now building the workforce housing for? And I think that we need to be clear about that, because I think that the the people that are living in Portsmouth, they don't understand that, and I think that you need to be clear, because to me, I'm not sure why at Court Street you were out taking new applications and advertising if you already had 600 people on a list that needed housing. Why were you looking at new applications and giving housing to those people over people that have been sitting on a list for I don't know how long? So that may be another discussion, but I would just like somebody to explain that clearly for everyone to understand, so that as you're moving forward and talking about affordable housing that you're building, who that affordable housing is for. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee member have final points? Is there anyone online?
Don't know. I'm not.
Skip.
Doesn't look like I'm lucky. No.
I don't see any hands up.
Wore them all out.
What? Oh, there's an iPhone there. Yep.
It might have been Joe listening. She said she was going to
Okay.
sign it. So
Okay.
with that, unless anyone has any final comments, I will call the meeting finally to
First
an end.
Friday in April?
What?
First Friday in April?
First Friday in April will be our next meeting, yes. I don't know the date off the
when
top
we're
of my
done here,
head,
right?
sorry. But we go back to the first Friday. All of them are listed on the city website right now. So if you go through every
thought it'd be good to
month, all the dates
remind everybody.
of our meetings are there. Thank you, everyone.
He'll shut it off.